At dusk, a large building with an entrance displaying a sign that reads dollars can be seen. The hooded hero hands the tightly tied bag to the man, awaiting his reaction. The girl asks if there is enough money inside to pay Sigalo. The man smiles happily upon seeing the amount of money and fastens the bag to his belt, saying there is enough money and wishing him a pleasant evening. The main character, wearing a long cloak, walks down a dimly lit corridor to the end. The girl hears obscene sounds, blushes, and now doubts the correctness of her actions. But she remembers the words of her husband, who asked her if she wanted to have a lover. Now she resolutely clenches her fists as she approaches the room, hidden by long curtains. Louis bravely opens them, and immediately a scream is heard from the embarrassed girl inside, and who clearly did not expect anyone else to show up. At the same moment, the man sitting on the bed in the middle of the room smiles, expressing joy because the main character has finally arrived. The girl explains that she came because they promised her the best gigolo in the country. Initially, the heroine was not going to do any of that. Louis stands near the window, trying on a new dress, when she asks the maid if Layard will like the new outfit, to which she, with admiration, assures the main character that he definitely will. The girl smiles happily when she hears the carriage approaching and realizes the man has finally arrived. She immediately leaves, starting to run downstairs, lifting her dress amid the maid's uneasy cries. The main character runs towards the tall man, shouting his name joyfully. Louis, with a smile on her face, says she missed him and asks if everything was all right with the property. Shortly after the wedding, Layard returned from a couple of months at the estate and now greets the heroine and asks her how she is. Suddenly, she says to greet the man exiting the carriage. A simply dressed girl appears before the main character, whom Layard introduces as a new maid. She greets her timidly as Louise's attention is drawn to the way a man caresses an unknown girl's shoulder. The girl freezes, looks at the new maid, and doesn't understand why her husband brought a woman to their estate. Later, the man explained that the girl's luggage was stolen on the way to the capital, and she had nowhere to stay. So Layard offered to let her stay for a couple of days because he couldn't leave the girl alone on the street. At night, the main character walks through the empty halls of the estate, wondering if she is exaggerating and making things up, and that it's actually just an unknown girl who will only be with them for a couple of days. The new maid apologized to the lady for the inconvenience, telling her she was on her way with her mother and her younger brother, but ended up at the estate. The maid promised to leave them as soon as she found a place to stay for the night. The main character was moved by her story because the girl reminded her of only in the past when she had to sell fish to survive, and making sure it didn't spoil. Sometimes it happened that the bucket of fish overturned, and she had to collect it with her own hands. The girl remembered that this was when Layard approached her and asked if everything was all right for her. She looked up with tears in her eyes, hoping for nothing. The man smiled at her and told her he would pay for the damaged goods. Louis recalled this warmly. There were difficult moments in her life, and Layard helped the girl precisely because he couldn't ignore her, as he was an understanding person. The heroine decides she needs to take care of the girl, especially since she will be leaving soon anyway. But suddenly, she notices something outside the window. She approaches it and sees her husband, but a woman is standing next to him. Louis managed to see the maid next to Layard when they suddenly kissed. The main character, with disgust, fear, and resentment, backed away from the window and hid behind the adjacent wall. The girl covered her mouth with her hands in shock, wondering what it was. The next morning, during breakfast, the protagonist was lost in thought when Layard snapped her out of it, asking what she was thinking about. The man behaved normally and asked why the girl wasn't eating, since she really loved the dishes being served. The main character smiled slightly, nodded, and started eating. Layard behaved affably, as if everything was in order, or so the girl thought. It didn't seem that way to her, because he was kind to her like before. Louis, looking down, remembered that she had definitely seen this, and suggested that perhaps the maid had mistaken the person for Layard. Because anything is possible. The protagonist, walking down the hall, thought about this when she looked out the window, and saw an unimaginable sight. Her husband was shamelessly enjoying himself with the maid. Louis backed away and started to tremble. She definitely hadn't imagined it. Layard was truly bored of her, yet he always spoke of his love for her. While standing there in shock, she didn't notice the door creak and open. The maid emerged from the room and noticed the main character trembling in surprise. The girl bowed to Louis and told her that the Count had simply called her. Layard steps out behind the maid and straightens his tie. The main character looks at the man with disappointment, calling him by his name as he turns around abruptly, surprised. The girl, crossing her arms over her chest, asks him how he could do this, to which the count replies that he doesn't understand what she is talking about. The maid stays behind silently, while the hero exhales tiredly and laughs at his wife's words. He leans towards her, claiming that he also loves her more than anything in the world. But he doesn't like it when someone enters his personal space. To Louis's questions, the hero says he wants to enjoy it alone. The girl stares blankly, recalling that Layard had actually mentioned freedom and personal space in the marriage contract. However, she couldn't even imagine that this meant betrayal. Layard, with a happy smile, says that if she starts interfering in his personal life, they will divorce. Louis realizes she has no choice but to accept this, because more than anything, she did not want to return to her terrible past. In the most difficult moments, he extended a hand to the girl, and she wants to keep believing in him. The main character felt sad, agreeing with his decision, to which Layard thanks her. After this incident, he began to shower the girl with attention. The man presented flowers to the protagonist, saying that as soon as he saw them, he immediately thought of the girl because they were her favorites. Louis was pleased by the recollection of such a detail, but Layard immediately said that Alina, the new maid, helped him choose the flowers. When the maid asked if everything was fine, Louis shook her head and said everything was fine. Layard began changing women so quickly that at some point the main character lost count and finally got used to it. During breakfast, the man asked if the girl was against his lovers. With a forced smile, she replied that she wasn't, because she was still the wife. At first, the hero looked at her surprised, but then he laughed and noted that he was just asking out of curiosity. And so 3 years passed. The girl often heard the maids discussing the absence of an heir and the fact that the Marquis was straying. And it was clear why he wasn't there, because if an illegitimate child were born, Louis could lose power. During lunch, the main character decides to ask Layard about the heir. The man looks at her, petrified with surprise, and says nothing for a while. He explains that an heir is not necessary at all when Louis objects, because at this rate, she will lose her position. The hero interrupts her, claiming that it is very difficult with children and that he just wants their happiness to last forever. The girl falls silent, wondering if she is happy in such a marriage to try and save it. Layard begins to get ready, says he has a meeting and has to leave without even looking at her, and asks her if she wants to add anything. The man turns to her and asks if this is important. The main character is about to speak when she looks down, dismissing it, and says that it holds no importance. She watches him leave and realizes she forgot that today is their anniversary. After all this, the girl didn't want to go out into the street, but she also felt very lonely in the mansion. After thinking for a while, she went outside, assuming she would feel better. But it was the opposite because her heart began to ache even stronger. The protagonist felt a drop of water on her cheek and looked up, watching as it started to rain, and people with hats started running home. The girl stands still while people shout about heavy rain. Louis looks at the sky and realizes that she really shouldn't have gone out, and that she couldn't save her relationship with Layard. She recalls a conversation she accidentally overheard between her husband and his friend. The man complained that his wife had caught him cheating and caused a scandal. Layard said with a smile that the girl knew everything and didn't care, because there was no better wife than Louis. The heroine, looking down, heard everything when her husband's friend told him that he too would like to find an unknown fool and marry her. She stands still in the rain, not moving at all, and sadly realizes that Layard cannot be changed. The girl starts walking forward, not following any path, and wondering if she will ever find happiness. Louis wandered in the pouring rain, completely losing track of time, and being alone in her thoughts. The protagonist snapped back to reality as her whole body trembled. This walk made her feel very cold. The girl started spinning around, looking for shelter from the rain, and noticing how far she had wandered from the city because there was absolutely nothing nearby. Suddenly, Louis saw an old ruined house with a broken fence. She ran towards it with a smile, grasped the door handle, and wondered if this was an abandoned house. Nothing. The heroine opened the door, and her eyes widened at what she saw. She was stunned. In front of her was a man covered in blood. He was sitting with his eyes closed, breathing heavily. Louis, frightened, covered her mouth with her hand and began to tremble, not from cold, but from panic. The girl, in shock, asked quietly if everything was all right, moving a little closer despite her fear. The mysterious man just mumbled something, and the girl decided to help him upon seeing that the man was suffering. The protagonist quickly took off her gloves and began unbuttoning her shirt, deciding to give him first aid, but noticing that it wasn't easy to examine the wound. Everything was covered in blood, and it wasn't clear where its origin was. Louis pulls at his collar, trying to remove his shirt and understand what happened to the man, when suddenly he flinches. He grabs the girl's hand and holds it in place. The frowning man asks who she is, while the fearful girl opens her mouth trying to say something. He still distrustfully holds the heroine, wondering who sent her, while Louis denies everything. She wants to explain that she wishes him no harm, but the man with dull eyes looks at her, breathing heavily. After a couple of seconds, he finally passes out, falling onto the girl, to which she blushes, and tries to push the man away. The main character blushes deeply and asks him to wake up, because the situation seems strange to her. And awkward. After a while, the man opens his eyes. He is still weak, but for some reason feels better. He sees the girl sitting with her back to him, and tries to remember where he saw this silver hair before. Hearing a movement, Louis turns around and is surprised to find that the man has regained consciousness. The girl gets up from the table and approaches, explaining that fortunately the wound was not that deep, so she just gave him first aid. The man, surprised, asks her for help, looking at her and touching his shoulder, checking that it barely hurts. The main character is embarrassed to note that she didn't have the necessary medicines, so the girl did everything in a hurry. The boy continues examining the shoulder, surprised that the help is much better than what nights provide. The girl covers herself with a large blanket, but traces of blood are still visible on the hem. The man looks closer and realizes that a piece of fabric is missing from the dress. He asks the girl in surprise if she tore the dress specifically to bandage his wounds, to which she shyly replies that there was no other option, as the matter was urgent, and assures him that the fabric was clean. The man laughs at the situation and says that's not the point. How could she rip her clothes just to use them as bandages? The main character tenses up, not understanding why the hero is smiling when he, seeing her appearance, assumes she comes from a noble family. The girl tells him not to laugh, otherwise the wounds will reopen and all his work will be in vain, to which the man replies that he will stop smiling at her. The man thanks her because she saved his life and apologizes for his previously harsh behavior. Louisa feels flattered, blushing, and replies that the most important thing is that the man is well. Then the heroine puts on her cloak and decides to leave. Layard will return soon anyway, and the rain has stopped. The man gets up, approaching the girl under her intense gaze. With a smile, he asks if she is curious to know what happened to him, why he ended up wounded in an abandoned building. The girl shakes her head, replying that there are different situations and she doesn't need him to explain anything. The heroine says that today she also did something uncharacteristic of her and would like to keep it a secret. She says goodbye to the man, turns around, and walks towards the exit. The man watches her go, wanting to confide his secret to her, but she refused so easily that he started wondering who the main character was. Louis, already moving away from the house, looked back timidly with the feeling that she had definitely seen this man somewhere before. The next morning, Layard sits near the girl's bed and enthusiastically relays the maid's rumors that the main character arrived wet and with torn clothes. She claims she didn't know what kind of rain was coming and that wet clothes were very hard to carry, so she just came with them. The man is not pleased with how a noble girl can walk like that. He apologizes and asks if it's because he forgot their anniversary, offering to talk about it, and asking if the heroine is well in terms of her health. The girl nods, looks aside, and smells a new scent of female perfume from her husband. Layard, having calmed down, says that an important banquet awaits him tomorrow. The hero explains that with the return of Archduke Lindman, high society will be buzzing. The girl says with a surprised look. She realizes she forgot about the upcoming event. Louis suddenly remembers something important and looks at her husband in shock. The man doesn't notice this and continues talking about how the knights conducted a reconnaissance, but less than half of the army died. The girl, with new realization, remembers that the same man she helped was Duke Lindemann. Edward von Lindemann, the heir to the throne, conducted a reconnaissance in perils a year ago, the so-called Forest of Death. Since the dragon was killed 30 years ago, darkness has reigned in the Forest of Perils, and strange things began to happen. The wild animals living there did strange things, and some even used magic. Most of the knights sent there to investigate died. So, all the nobility thought that the emperor had decided to deal with the main thorn in his side, Archduke Lindemann. But a few years later, he returned alive, and it turned out that he saved more than half of his knightly army. The heroine tensely recalls that he was wounded and doesn't understand what the Archduke was doing in an abandoned building far from the city. Layard's voice pulls her out of her thoughts, asking if she is listening to him, and he asks the girl to be careful. He says there are rumors that the Archduke likes to flirt with beautiful girls, seducing them, and then use them for his dark magic. The girl agrees not to associate with such a dangerous person, thinking to herself that this has nothing to do with her, since she had only crossed paths with the Archduke a couple of times at banquets before. It is rational to assume that life will not bring them together again. The next day, at an important banquet, the Archduke himself appears before her to Layard's surprised gaze. Edward recognizes the girl with a smile and asks if she is Duchess Louisa. Tension reigns between the girl Layard and the Archduke. The emperor sits on the throne, congratulating Archduke Lindemann on his safe return. In sound, Edward thanks him, but doesn't understand why there is a special banquet for this occasion. The man explains that the Archduke went a long way under his command and saved half the army from death. The main character bows her head with a malicious smile, thanking the emperor that he survived thanks to his blessing. The emperor frowns with a forced smile, admitting that the banquet is more timely than ever, thinking to himself why Edward is still unharmed. The man had heard rumors that the Archduke was seriously wounded, so why was he still alive? He turns his face angrily towards the Archduke. The current emperor, Edward's half-brother, as soon as he fraudulently became heir, immediately began sending hitmen after Edward, but he survived. The main character recruited talented warriors and formed an army of knights. Instead of participating in political disputes, he began to expand his influence through property management and charitable activities. The emperor felt threatened and sent the knights into perils, but they returned unharmed, increasing the emperor's hatred for his half-brother to its climax. Edward approaches Count Cloth, who congratulates him and greets him. Layard is surprised that the man managed to return successfully and says he is honored to be here. The Archduke notices that Louis is nearby, recognizes her, and smiles at her while she looks away. The girl looks down, remembering that they decided to keep their last encounter a secret, and worrying that if Layard finds out everything, he will get angry. The man smiles at her, pretending not to know the heroine, and greets her, asking if she is the same Duchess Louisa. The girl nods. She says it is an honor for her to meet him and congratulates him on his return, silently glad that the man is pretending not to know her. At the same time, Layard looks suspiciously at Louis, not understanding the Archduke's sudden interest in his wife. He turns his gaze to Edward, noticing how he is drilling a hole through the main character. The man doesn't like this much, frowns, about to say something. Suddenly, he is interrupted by a beautiful girl approaching from behind and calling him by name to greet him. The main character, forgetting the previous tension, greets Liliana and takes the girl by the arm. She introduces Lady Liliana to the Archduke, who recently entered social circles, while the girl congratulates him on his return from the expedition. Louis dislikes seeing all this and looks away, wondering what to do now. The main character leaves her husband with the girl, saying that she is not feeling well, and wants to leave to the man's surprised gaze. Layard agrees to let the heroine leave and offers to escort her outside, still holding Liliana's hand. And standing next to her, Louis doesn't understand how he can say such a thing when he will obviously spend the entire banquet with a new girl. She shakes her head and refuses to accompany him. Suddenly, the Archduke offers to accompany the heroine and asks if Layard is against it. He smiles and wonders if the girl would mind accompanying him. Layard immediately changes expression, becoming serious and looking at his wife with displeasure. The hero feigns a surprised smile, because for the first time he sees the Archduke accompanying someone. Edward says it is time for him too, and that he wants to accompany the heroine as she is leaving. But the girl refuses. She is about to leave under her husband's approving smile, who praises her for such a decision. The girl says goodbye, turning around and leaving with an unpleasant feeling settling in her heart. The Archduke watches her silently as everyone goes in different directions. Two guys stop near the exit, don't let the man pass, and call him a vagrant. The hero, angry, asks them to step aside, because they are not only blocking his path, but also other people. The boys don't move. they continue mocking and insulting the man, who has already regretted coming here several times. Louis approaches the exit at the same time, sees the crowd, and doesn't understand what is happening, assuming there is a fight ahead. The girl looks through the crowd, wanting to ask people to move, when she notices a familiar face. She approaches the man standing at the entrance, smiles at him, and asks if it is Makshin. The hero recognizes the girl immediately, his face changing, surprised by her presence as she runs towards him. Makshin asks the heroine what she is doing here when she tells him she is married, and that she has been in the capital for 3 years. The boys who harass the man step aside confused, asking who they are to each other, and they find out that Louis and Makshin are childhood friends. One of the youths looks at them in disbelief, wondering why Lady Claude is friends with such a fool. He recalls the circulating rumors that Louis was from a poor family. The boy doesn't believe they are just friends and thinks they are lovers, but she is Count Claude's wife, one of the emperor's closest associates, meaning there is no reason for unnecessary hatred. 2 youths bow to the lady, apologizing for the misunderstanding and wishing her a pleasant time as they leave. Makshin thanks the heroine for putting the ignorant boys in their place, and he is happy to have met the girl after a long separation. Louis examines the man's uniform and wonders if he is a member of the chivalry order, saying she heard how the hero became second in command. The girl is happy for his achievements and asks how things are in Perils, the place that used to be her home. Makshin assures her that everything is fine, and, to the heroine's surprised gaze, he explains that he looked toward the city and was surprised not to find her there. Louise offers to visit her at the estate and suggests that Layard wouldn't mind. She asks how Makshin is doing as a tall man slowly approaches them. The Archduke smiles, recognizes the man, and is glad to have found him. To the hero's surprised gaze, Edward explains that he has been looking for Makshin for a long time, but it turns out he is with Madame Claude. The Archduke, to avoid misunderstandings, warns the girl that he wasn't following her, but simply looking for Makshin. The protagonist ignores Edward's words, happily says goodbye to her childhood friend, and prepares to leave. As she leaves, she lowers her voice to almost a whisper and tells the Archduke that if he moves too much, the wound might reopen. The man smiles with satisfaction and notices that she pretends not to know each other, although she is clearly worried about his condition. The Archduke watches with a smile of satisfaction as Louis says goodbye to Makshin. Edward approaches the man and asks what connects them to Louis, and in response receives information that they are childhood friends. In response to Makshin's questions, he ignores him, saying he doesn't know the girl, and that he just wanted to escort her to the exit, and they quickly change the subject and offer to return to the banquet. At the same time, Louis, blushing, runs to the carriage and looks back, checking if Edward is following her. After making sure no one is behind her, she pulls up the hem of her dress to make it easier to leave quickly. After several days, Edward sits in his study playing chess with Makshin when the knight asks him what is bothering him. The Archduke denies his concern, as he observes that the man across from him has won a game of chess, and praises him. Makshin replies that he hasn't improved his chess game, and reproaches the Archduke for giving in to the man's nod. The hero changes the subject by asking the knight if he will be on duty tomorrow, and informs him that he heard the man preparing to go to Cloth's estate. The man confirms this, and tells Edward that nothing suspicious was noticed about the Countess. The Archduke, after thinking for a couple of seconds, asks which girl, to which the knight replies that that is a difficult question because the last time they saw Louise, it was 10 years ago. However, the main character insists, and Makshin nods with a warm smile on his face, remembering the girl. He says that Louis hasn't changed at all since their last encounter. She has always been very kind, and is somewhat similar to Edward, to which the Archduke smiles, which is hard to believe under the knight's serious gaze. The man asks Makshin not to let his guard down, even if he is very happy to meet him, silently noting how happy his face becomes when he talks about Louis. Edward suspiciously says that the Clote family is quite loyal to the Emperor's circle, and he releases the man, promising that they will come to an agreement next time. When Makshin leaves the room, he wonders why the main character suddenly started following Louis. Edward remains seated in his place. He recalls all the time that, when he was in danger, the Emperor kept sending assassins to whom the soldiers asked for reinforcements to fight back. However, on the last day of the expedition, a comrade betrayed him, and it was then, in a deplorable state, that he met Countess Cloth. She was also conspiring with the emperor, although he didn't notice anything suspicious in the reports. She didn't fit in with high society at all. Louis tore her skirt without hesitation, which means this is not the first time such a lady has done something with Layard, and what the imperial gang is planning. The man remembers that, judging by the countess's behavior, she recognized him. But she asked him to keep what happened a secret. The hero supposes that this way she wanted to hide her whereabouts, but why did she need to? And who was she really? That evening, Louis awaits her guest and tries on a new dress that the maid fastens for her. She looks in the mirror and is happy with her gorgeous outfit because it reminds her of the good old days. The girl eagerly goes downstairs to the first floor to meet the guest and happily greets Maction. The man has just dismounted and is holding the reins when he sees Louis. He thanks the heroine for the invitation and tells her that he truly appreciates their meeting after such a long separation. The girl escorts him to the estate, expressing joy at his arrival, wanting to tell him everything quickly. They go up to the guest room, where a table is already set with a cake that catches Maction's eye. The protagonist sits at the table and says she didn't know what a man likes to eat, so she just recalled his old habits and asked him to serve an apple pie. He eats a piece with pleasure and notices how delicious the pie turned out under Louis's happy gaze. The girl laughs at the man, noting how much he has grown, but his character is still the same as in childhood. The heroine offers to add more, seeing how much he likes the pie. Louis wonders how Maction ended up in the Order of Knights, while he says that the Archduke accepted him into his ranks because he found his property on the way back. The girl is happy that the hero is doing well, because he seems much happier now. The man, having told enough about himself, began to take an interest in the main character, and asked her if she was getting along well with her husband. The atmosphere immediately became heavy around them, and the girl, with a forced smile, said she was lucky to have met a worthy man. Maction exhaled cheerfully upon realizing that Count Lallard turned out to be a decent husband under Louis's intense gaze. The girl decided to change the subject and ask the hero to walk through the garden and show her a variety of flowers. The man agreed, and now they walk through the garden with umbrellas and look at the sky, wondering if it will rain. The hero notices that Louis predicts the weather well when he recalls that she knew it would rain, but the strange atmosphere gave him no peace. The youth see it starting to rain, and the girl tries to open the umbrella, telling Maction to do the same. A man stands next to the heroine, watching her helplessly try to open a broken umbrella. Without thinking twice, he invites her under his so the girl doesn't get wet. Suddenly, the rain intensifies even more, and Louis grabs his hand, points to the gazebo, and offers to run there to hide from the rain. They run to the building to escape the rain and laugh. Having arrived, the main character with a happy smile says that this escape from the rain reminded her of childhood events. The girl notices Maction's wet shoulder and apologizes, blaming herself when he interrupts her mid-sentence, assuring her that it was great fun. The man is happy to be here with the main character after a long separation because she has her own charm. The hero turns to the girl and remembers that he wanted to ask her about Mr. Grimm, and if he is still in the capital. Louis shakes her head, saying he died 5 years ago, and reassures Maction when he regrets not staying. And the truth is, she simply had no other choice but to leave. He looks away with regret, suggesting that it probably wasn't easy for the main character. She nods, looking down in pain as she remembers what happened. The girl shares her experiences, as when she escaped, she thought she had gotten out of the cage, but ended up in another one that was just more beautiful. She sighs with a fallen expression, saying that it is very difficult for her now under Maction's understanding gaze. The protagonist shares that the worst part is that only she can fix it, looking at her childhood friend. She remains seated in the man's understanding silence, looking down sadly. Meanwhile, the Archduke goes to Cloth's estate, worried about his friend, thinking that since he is a close friend of Louis, it is unlikely that he will be careful. The man wants to make sure for himself that everything is all right with Maction, and gets into the carriage to pick up the knight from there. At the same time, Louis says goodbye to her friend and thanks him for the great time spent. Maction thanks him in return and asks her to send news from time to time. They are interrupted by Layard, who enters the estate and sees his wife with the hero. The man smiles and expresses surprise at how strong Louis's childhood friend is. The main character, after greeting her husband, hurries to introduce them. Maction shakes the hero's hand and tells him he is happy to see the Count, but that it is time for him to leave. The heroine's husband smiles tensely and under Maction's disapproving gaze. He promises to have dinner with the three of them next time so they can get to know each other better. A man approaches the horse while some youths accompany him, wishing him a successful journey. Suddenly, Layer notices a carriage approaching his estate and wonders if Louis is expecting someone else, to which she replies negatively. The carriage stops and the footman opens the door. The Archduke steps out of it, wishing everyone a pleasant evening and smiling. All three freeze bewildered at what the man is doing here and why he came. Not much time passed waiting for an answer, because Edward himself says he came to take Maction back to the estate. Amidst perplexed looks, he explains that he was worried about a heavy downpour, and that he was nearby, and decided to take a carriage for his valuable comrade. Louis tenses at this statement upon realizing that rain is no longer expected, and this was clear to anyone from the clear evening sky. The girl hopes the hero leaves as soon as possible, because she doesn't want the details of her strange encounter in an abandoned building revealed in front of her husband. But Edward snaps her out of her thoughts. He explains that on the way to his estate, he saw a beautiful garden and hopes that one day the heroine will invite him for a walk there. Layard frowns, dislikes where the conversation is going, and decides to intervene. He interrupts the conversation by saying that one day the man will definitely be able to walk in the garden. Smiling tensely and wishing him to leave quickly, Edward looks at the Count and nods, saying he remembered this and that he would eagerly await the invitation. They part ways, wishing each other a pleasant evening as Layard's gaze locks onto the departing Archduke's back. When left alone, the man speaks to the main character and asks if she thinks it's a good idea to hang out with such dishonest people. The girl looks at her husband bewildered. She says that Maction is her childhood friend, and she doesn't understand why he is dishonest. The hero thinks it wasn't just about his friend, but also the Archduke. He wasn't clear why he came to his estate looking for some knight. Layard exhales and explains that he doesn't know how the heroine met her childhood friend, but he was a traveling commoner and she was a countess. Louis wants to object. The man himself takes commoners as lovers, and she just met a friend. She herself was a commoner before. Why then does he forbid her even simple communication? The protagonist freezes upon recalling her wedding, where Layard told her to forget her maiden name. And since then she became a countess. The girl understands that her husband is ashamed of her past and doesn't care at all what she wants. The main character clenches her fists and frowns, resolutely saying that Maction is her only friend. However, without finishing, she sees the look and expression on Layard's face, getting scared. And falling silent, Louis lowers her voice and looks down, promising that if the man wants it so much, she will try to stay away from her childhood friend. The hero, satisfied with her answer, takes the girl's hand, telling her that if he were a lover, he wouldn't say anything. And he smiles at her bright idea. The man offers to get a lover for Louis because she is bored. The main character doesn't want a lover, but she also doesn't want to argue or fight. And she is already beginning to tremble with hopelessness. Deciding not to destroy the piece with her own hands, she simply agrees to his proposal. The next day, Maction reads the letter sitting next to the Archduke and sighs deeply. Edward looks up from his newspaper and asks what the knight doesn't like when he covers his mouth with his hand, forgetting to control his emotions. Maction, with a sad look, explains that his friend's husband advised him to find a lover. He continues talking about how the girl wonders where to find a lover, and if it would be better for her to look closer at a gigolo, when it is difficult for Edward to even imagine what that would be like. The hero asks for help finding an answer to the letter, because he doesn't know how to help or what to write. Edward wonders what the knight will write, while saying he would like to advise Louis not to listen to her husband, but that he cannot interfere in their family affairs. Maction leans over the letter and admits that he is worried about his friend because he knows she will go alone to look for the gigolo. Edward, after thinking for a couple of seconds, offers himself as Countess Cloth's lover. The knight looks confusedly at the Archduke and asks what he just said. Later, the main character receives a reply and happily takes the letter from the maid. In the letter, Maction writes that this news took him by surprise, and he spent the whole night thinking about his answer. Previously, the knight asks why Edward wants to become Louise's lover, and why he needs it. The Archduke asks him if he is suitable as the girl's lover. Louise reads the letter later, and finds out that her childhood friend knows a good man who is ideal for the main character. Edward answers the knight's questions by saying he is simply bored. Maction freezes confused, looking at the man when he can't find the words to answer the Archduke. The main character explains that after returning from perils, she did all the work on the estates. And then the opportunity arose when he only wanted to watch the Clote family. Maxon, tense and worried, says it could be dangerous if the Archduke becomes her lover, and at the same time watches him. The knight reproaches the protagonist, reminding her of the wound and the difficult situation she was in not long ago. Edward ignores him in every possible way, saying everything will be fine and that this time he will try to be more careful. Maxon is lost in thought, blaming himself for not having performed his duty as a knight well, which is why the Archduke suffered. Among his subordinates was a young man whose younger sister ended up in the imperial hospital, but he defended His Highness to the end, so Edward specifically left the residence to avoid being escorted. The man specifically planned and carried out this attack against Edward. He himself smeared the sword with blood because he knew that then his sister would be safe. Maxon didn't understand how the Archduke, in such a state, managed to defend himself. Edward asks if he is really that unreliable, pulling the knight out of his thoughts. Maxon shakes his head, denying his words and following the Duke's advice. He starts writing a letter, and indeed, Edward will be much better than some incomprehensible gigolo. The letter describes the Dollars Motel, where the girl will meet the best gigolo named Elysian. Louise wonders where her friend got such knowledge. For example, he had never been interested in women before. Her best friend was really interested in men. The girl sits near the fire, watches Maxon's letter burn, and wonders if she will manage to get a lover. Edward has been lying in the motel for several days, waiting for the main character's arrival, and realizing that today she won't wait for him. Out of boredom, he starts thinking about the first time he heard about Countess Clody, recalling the rumors about Layard's wedding. Even then there were rumors about her, because no one from high society knew her, and saw her for the first time. At the wedding, Louis took cookies from the banquet thinking of trying them. But when I stopped, I saw a lot of amazed stares. The girl was confused and asked what she had done wrong until her husband called her. People immediately realized that the heroine was not of noble origin, as food at the banquet always served as decoration. The nobility was astonished by the complete lack of manners. However, the main character thought it was funny. She was even interested for a while, thinking that this girl was unique. But the interest quickly faded when the Archduke saw that she was always in the shadows and running away somewhere. The girl not only didn't fit into social circles, but was also quite boring. Many years have passed since that incident, and only now did he manage to forget Louis, remembering while lying in the motel waiting for her. The hero smiles, realizes how funny life is, and puts on a mask, when suddenly the maid offers to serve him tea, to which he gladly agrees. The girl cleans the glass looking at the strange mask and blushing, suggesting that the man has some specific preferences. There were always many rumors about Edward. He was never involved in love scandals. Society would also be stirred up by the fact that he returned alive from the forest of death. People said he mastered black magic and was afraid of women, although people respected him. But things never happened without strange rumors. The heroine looks at the Duke and wonders why he put on this strange mask and spent several days at the motel, assuming that the rumors would spread very quickly. Edward didn't care. On the contrary, such strange behavior from a man would distract the people close to the emperor. Suddenly, the door opens, taking the man out of his thoughts as the girl in the cloak approaches the bed. The hero turns around, recognizes Louis, and is happy that she came. The protagonist takes off her hood and declares in a firm tone that she is looking for the best gigolo in the country. Edward tells the maid to leave with a malicious smile. He changes his voice, getting off the bed, approaching the countess, and asking her what brought her here. The man supposes she is bored of nights with her husband and assures her she has come to the right place. Louis blushes deeply and timidly says that she wants to have a lover. The hero is surprised that the girl is not interested in his body, but he agrees. But he asks what benefit he will get from this. The main character promises that the man will heal so well that she won't have to receive other guests, to which he replies that this is not enough. He leans closer to her and asks what else she can offer him when the man seems suspiciously familiar to the girl. Louis decided she had messed something up and resolutely replied that she would give him whatever he wanted. The hero smiles, says he will accept this offer, and takes the mask off his face. The man looks directly at the heroine as she freezes in shock. The girl turns towards the exit, starts to flee, and apologizes for her rudeness, thinking that Maxon brought her here on purpose. She thinks her childhood friend and the Archduke planned everything, grabbing the curtain with her hand. But Edward catches her and tells her she shouldn't leave. He leans closer to her and promises her that the fun is just beginning. The man says the girl soon won't have as much fun and will get terribly bored. So the heroine shouldn't miss such a wonderful opportunity. The hero leans towards her ear with a smile and whispers that he didn't think the lady also liked having fun in brothels. Louis turns around, frowning and embarrassed, shouting that she is here to find a lover. He stands up to his full height, offering himself as a lover, awaiting her answer. The girl looks at the man confused and says she didn't come here to joke, to which the hero nods, understanding the seriousness of her proposal. The protagonist offers him her hand, agreeing to his proposal, announcing that from now on they are lovers. He leans towards her hand, kisses it, and promises her that as a lover he will do everything for her. She blushes, brings her hand to her heart, and looks at everything with excitement. Later that night, Louis walks around the estate and still cannot calm down and move away from what happened. The heroine doesn't understand why she did this, because now she has a strange feeling in her soul. She remembers that Liar himself advised her to have a lover, but the girl cannot shake the feeling that she is doing wrong and deceiving him. As she goes down the stairs, she realizes her husband is standing below. He turns towards her and tells her that today is a wonderful evening and the moon is shining, and offers her a drink smiling. A girl once fell in love with this smile, and one day it saved her life. She lets out a look, regretting not being able to turn back time. She timidly starts the conversation calling him by his name, but falls silent. The protagonist looks down and remembers that lovers cannot be mentioned, otherwise their relationship will end. The girl looks at her husband and wonders for a couple more seconds if she should start a conversation. In the end, Louis says she decided to take a walk around the estate. Layard approves of her decision and asks her to be careful because it is already very dark. She turns around before going out onto the balcony and wishes him good night. The hero remains standing with glasses inside the estate, smiling at her and nodding his head, wishing him good night in return. The next morning, Louis places a stack of papers on the table in front of the Archduke, saying that this is her contract. Edward nods, understanding that it is a contract, but wondering why the girl needs it. The protagonist, clearing her throat, explains that she has no idea what her lover is for or what to do with him, so she wants to carefully explain everything that is in the contract. She gives an example that she doesn't want them to behave like a married couple towards each other. The man accepts her terms and asks if she changes her mind to tell him immediately, and he places the contract back on the table, offering to resolve all problems through negotiations, and not through a contract. She pinches the fabric of the dress, saying they are not lovers at Edward's laughter, and the question of who they are to each other. The hero explains that lovers are unscrupulous people who deceive their partners, but they mistakenly believe they are ideal lovers and wonder if the heroine knew what she was getting into. The girl clarifies that they are not real lovers, and she also has a contract with her husband to that effect. The man is surprised that contracts are so fashionable nowadays. He shrugs and says that in any case, he will be more useful than a gigolo. In fact, he is not a simple lover, but the most famous person in the capital, Edward von Lindemann. Louis asks why the Archduke liked him so much, to which he explains that he has enough money, and he is tired of female attention. Edward says he can openly express his desires and assures her that she will turn out to be the same chess piece. He invites her to think carefully about everything again, but for now, he will read the papers the girl brought himself. The man immediately became interested in what kind of documents they were, and as it turned out, all the papers were almost identical. There were only a few differences, but most of the time in all newspapers, a line was repeated. If you sympathize with another person, the relationship will be complete. The hero, seeing this, turns to the girl and asks why she is not looking for true love. The protagonist explains that her husband advised her to have a lover. Edward realizes how strong Louis is and asks her what she would like, to which the girl expresses the desire for her husband to feel what she feels, and to understand her. The main character says that her mother used to say that if a fight cannot be avoided, one must not only desire victory, but also fight bravely. The man agrees to help the main character in this battle, explaining that this week there will be a banquet with the Heliod family, the Count's new mistress. The hero asks if the girl is ready to organize the first fight, to which she resolutely nods. Edward is satisfied with himself and suggests starting slowly, To the girl's question, he replies that first they must fall in love. Louis puts an expression of disgust on her face as she shakes her head. She says there is no way she will fall in love with the Archduke, while Edward laughs at her emphatic response. The girl asks him to stop making fun of her and says that this is very serious for her, although she understands that the man is pursuing his own interests. Edward apologizes and explains what he meant about the next banquet, because there they will have to play the loving couple. The main character looks away clumsily and asks what she should do so that everyone thinks she is in love. The man asks if she has any ideas, when the girl nods and leans in to tell him what she saw in the novels. After listening to the girl, Edward is satisfied with her plan and wonders if she is always this active. The hero invites the girl to practice a couple of times before the banquet using a mirror. The man smiles and thinks that Louise is quite a fun girl when he is interrupted by a knock on the door. Maxon enters his office and greets him with the desire to quickly convey urgent news to him. The hero says that movement has been noticed from the Emperor's side. They are preparing for a fencing competition. The knight says that the gentleman said he would definitely invite Edward, who did well last time. The main character understands that this is just an excuse to assess the man's skills and force him to leave his capital, or worse, harm him. Edward leans back in his chair, complaining that he is tired and that he should have killed his half-brother a long time ago so that there would be no more such tiring tasks. Knights from noble families come from all over the empire. They say that those who manage to leave the battle alive win. The main character shrugs and says that she will have to refrain from attending such an event. But Maxon informs that the prize will be the Lencha sword. The knight says that the emperor will personally present the prize to the winner. The man crosses his arms in shock and says that his half-brother has lost his mind by giving away imperial treasures so easily. Maxon suggests that the emperor prepare for special training, knowing that the Archduke will not limit himself to just sitting, and observe how the treasure flows into the wrong hands. Edward wonders where to find a suitable master, because Maxon was not yet skilled enough when the knight suddenly says he knows a man in the capital better than him. The hero says he hasn't managed to win a fight, yet to the Archduke's surprised gaze. Maxon achieved the position solely thanks to his own efforts, and this man is stronger than him. It would be wonderful to attract him to his side. Edward asks the man to introduce him to this man after the banquet. The main character suddenly remembers and asks another question about Louis. He complains to the knight that today the girl said she would never fall in love with him, until Maxon understands why the Archduke is dissatisfied since it was an appropriate reaction. Edward makes a pitiful face and asks if this is strange, because he couldn't even imagine that there was a girl in the world who would be willing to reject him. Maxon, in a stupor, keeps silent to himself, hoping that everything is fine between Louis and His Majesty. Louis and Layard go to the banquet in complete silence, without saying a word. After visiting the Archduke's estate, the girl started feeling more uncomfortable with Layard. Her husband had no idea that she was visiting His Highness's property. A girl runs out of the Elliot family mansion and greets Layard. The mistress, right before Louis's eyes, flirts with the man without hesitation. As expected, the hero leaves the girl alone and is about to leave with Liliana. The man tells the heroine that if she gets tired, she can go home as usual. Louis looks up and resolutely replies that today she will enjoy the banquet. Layard is slightly surprised, but doesn't pay much attention to it and wishes her good night. The girl is left alone, hearing vile whispers behind her back that she has no self-esteem since she arrived at the banquet as her husband's mistress. Edward saves her from loneliness, who approaches from behind and notices how quickly her husband escaped. The man hands her a drink and offers her a glass. The hero asks if the girl was training or not, to which she nods. In this case, the Archduke nods and offers to start implementing the plan right away. He calms the girl, assures her that everything will be fine, and tells her to start. Louis deliberately drops her glass and shouts loudly to attract attention. Due to the broken glass and the noise, all eyes turn to her, including Layard. Edward approaches Louise, takes her hand, leans towards her, and asks if she is okay. Layard's gaze darkens immediately, and he observes this scene. His Majesty is happy that everything is fine with the heroine and leads her aside. They say it can be dangerous here, under people's gaze. In fact, the main character whispers to the man and asks if he was acting too much. Edward denies it and asks her if she feels many gazes directed at them. Having captured all the public's attention, they prepare for a new trick. The hero asks if the girl is ready, to which he receives an affirmative answer. He leans towards her hand and asks if she would like to dance the first dance with him at this banquet. People immediately start whispering about such an event, while the protagonist's husband looks displeased at what is happening. Lewis sketches her happiest smile, blushing and nodding. The nobility whispers that it seems they spent a long time together at the previous banquet, while Layard stares at the man. Edward dances with Lewis, specifically when he is next to Layard. The girl complains that she feels like some kind of clown, but the Archduke calms her down and simply tells her to enjoy the moment. Edward admits that he is not particularly worried and reminds them that they need to adequately entertain the crowd, because everyone understands why it is the first dance to such a melody. Lewis looks around and realizes that indeed a certain atmosphere reigned. The Duke leans towards the girl, asking her not to look at the other couples anymore, and to look him in the eyes. Otherwise, it will seem that the girl who needs help is less sincere than her savior. The main character feels him now, looking only at the man. They continue dancing so closely that Lewis can feel the hero's breath. The girl looks away and says that she still doesn't feel comfortable enough with a man. It's awkward to look him in the eyes for so long. The Archduke understands what she means. He agrees and says that he also feels awkward with her. The main character notices that he speaks very confidently when looking her in the eyes. The man explains that this doesn't mean he feels comfortable, and that there are many reasons to feel awkward at such times. As the girl ponders what all this means, Edward notices how the Count strangely reacts, finding it amusing. The man tells Lewis how the Count constantly stares at them. The main character blushes, thinking that Layard is jealous. She is happy with the result because it is exactly what she wanted, but she needs to play to the end. After the first dance, Layard runs into the garden with a complex grimace, dragging his mistress behind him. A man was talking to his mistress about wonderful music when a movement in the crowd caught his attention. He realized that as soon as the music stopped, Lewis went somewhere with the Archduke. Therefore, the hero now runs among the bushes, assuming that Edward is plotting something. Because Lewis generally does not behave this way, Layard looks up and sees his wife on the balcony with the Archduke. Looking closer, he realizes how close Lewis is to His Majesty and becomes furious. In response to his mistress's questions about what happened, he silences her and explains to her, with a kiss, that he is simply looking forward to their night together. Taking advantage of this, the man's eyes slip to the balcony, trying to see what is happening there. Layard wonders what Lewis will be thinking, getting involved with a man like the Archduke. Edward explains to the girl that if you look from below, it will seem like they are very close to each other. Lewis nods, catching the scent of the man's roses and guessing that it is the scent of high-quality oils. The girl, having regained her senses, steps away and asks how her husband reacted, and if his attitude towards her will change. The main character, not wanting to upset the girl, says that judging by his reaction, everything went well, noticing what was happening below. He looks with displeasure at the scene unfolding, not understanding how Layard can behave this way in front of his wife. Edward cannot believe that Lewis trusts such a disgusting person, and to distract the girl, he invites her to continue playing their roles at this banquet. The Archduke moves away, saying he will kiss her hand because he considers it necessary. A man with teeth removes his glove at the protagonist's surprised gaze. The hero looks her in the eyes, takes her hand, and pulls her closer. Lewis's face turns very red as His Majesty kisses her hand. She doesn't understand why her heart started beating so fast looking at his hand. The man notices Layard's dissatisfied gaze below, who is furious at what he sees. The protagonist's husband takes his mistress, abandons her, and leaves the man alone with Lewis. Edward, squinting, realizes that Layard has left and informs the heroine about it. The girl sighs and says that if this happens again, she won't be able to bear it. The man smiles with satisfaction, realizing that the heroine is delighted with him, and boasts that in all secular society, there is not a single girl who is indifferent to him, except for 3. Louise, embarrassed, shouts that she is not interested in him either and follows Edward. She frowns, embarrassed, realizing that in reality everything is as he says. Because before, all girls were crazy about him. When a man was the heir, all the girls in the empire wanted to attract his attention. However, despite so much attention, he constantly postponed his engagement, about which Lewis constantly read in the newspapers. And she asked her mother why everyone was so delighted with the prince. Her mother said that everyone was delighted only because he was the heir, and that he was much uglier than she imagined. But she was wrong. The main character believed that the Archduke was the only one superior in beauty to Layard. The girl goes with a man to see her friend, assuming that, given that he managed to devise that plan, he is probably very good at love relationships and has a lot of experience with women. Edward asks the main character to call him by his name, since today they officially announced their relationship. Louise, blushing, agrees and looks the hero in the eyes. That night, the girl arrived home in Edward's carriage, and the servants, upon seeing this, immediately began to whisper. Layard never returned that night, and several days passed. Finally, when the protagonist's husband returned, he simply hugged her and told her he was going to rest, promising to talk to her later. Although Liart returned a couple of days later, nothing changed between them. Maxon received a stack of letters from the butler, who was smiling at him. 10 days had already passed, and society was still discussing the Archduke's relationship. And Louis's, Edward, lying in his bed, hears Maxon calling him. The main character approaches the door tiredly and opens it. Seeing the knight, the man wonders why Maxon came to him so early. Edward complains that society has been discussing what happened for 10 days while he was sitting in his chair. The main characters are also perplexed that Louis handled such a difficult task, but he didn't pay attention to it at all. Maxon reports that a letter from Louis has arrived, and he immediately sees the Archduke's cheerful smile. The men sit in silence for a couple of minutes when Edward sighs dissatisfiedly, sighing that everything is as expected. He asks the hero for writing material, with the intention of writing a reply immediately. In the letter, Louis asked if she could visit the estate in the near future. Having written the letter, His Majesty hands the envelope to the man, asking him to send his reply as soon as possible. Edward wonders if Maxon spoke to Louis after that same letter, to which he shakes his head. The Archduke remembers that at first the girl thought that she and Maxon had decided to joke like this. Edward hopes the knight will talk to his former girlfriend and promises to reward him for that help. Louis laughs at Maxon's plan, holding his letter in her hands. The man awkwardly scratches his cheek, with the excuse that he thought Louis would just make a new friend. She makes him promise to be honest, because at that moment, she had no idea how awkward she was. The girl accepts his apologies and realizes that, in reality, he is just worried about her. The heroine agrees that it was reckless to simply look for a gigolo. Louis smiles, looks at her friend, and assures her that if everything were as before, the girl would have come to the knight for advice. The main character offers a cup of tea, while Maxon says she is a strong girl. She looks down and admits that she also once considered herself a strong person. But then the girl was alone. Then she had nothing to fear. But now she was trapped here and realized she was incapable of anything. The main character turns to him with a sad look, claiming she is very weak. Maxon falls silent for a couple of seconds after offering to teach Louis how to practice fencing. The girl looks around uneasily, checking if anyone can hear them, and approaches her friend. The heroine leans towards the man and explains that no one here knows that the girl was into fencing. Louis missed the right moment to tell her husband about her hobby, so now she keeps it a secret. She remembers that her mother also advised her not to tell anyone about this, so she asked Maxon to speak more quietly. The man apologizes with a smile as he looks at the heroine. However, he suggests that if the girl ever decides to practice, she should come to him. The hero explains that he lives in Edward's annex, where there is a training ground. The servants don't go there, so no one will find the main character. Louise asks excitedly if she can come today. After a couple of seconds, they get on the horse and are about to ride. She smiles and says that the various rumors about where they go only benefit them, because this way, the news will reach Layard faster. Upon arrival, the man shows the territory where he is working. Louise looks around the place with a smile and interest. She notices the swords in their scabbards and asks if she can take one. The girl only wants to warm up, so she grabs a wood stove. The heroine moves away from the counter with anticipation, while Maxon asks when was the last time Louise held a sword in her hands. She replies that she hasn't practiced sword handling for about 4 years. The hero sees this and realizes she is still very skilled. The girl, moving away, blushes from the pleasant feeling of nostalgia spreading through her chest. The heroine happily turns around and asks her childhood friend if he has sportswear. The man goes to look for clothes and asks the girl to wait a little. The heroine calls the leaving man to ask him something. The girl, already guessing something, asks him if she brought up this topic about fencing in vain. Maxon asks the girl what she means. Louis smiles, suggesting he think carefully about everything, because she knew that, by taking the sword, she couldn't change her mind and would become his mentor. Maxon says this is not entirely true, assuring that he only wanted to see the main character's smile. As a childhood friend, he remembered that she liked it a lot, but I don't deny that he had his own reasons. Lewis smiles, understands him, and asks who she should train. The hero quickly explains that he wants her to teach fencing to Edward. The girl is surprised by such an unexpected request, but thinks there is nothing to worry about because she managed to return alive from perils. The thoughtful protagonist recalls what kind of injury the Archduke suffered when she found him in an abandoned building. She remembers that the wound was not very deep, but if the girl hadn't given him first aid, he would have died. Reflecting, she believes that someone is threatening Edward. Louise hesitates for a second, but finally agrees to help with the training. But with conditions. She remembers that the Archduke knew she was deceiving him, but did nothing, so she asks the men to help her with something. The girl asks the hero to crouch down and tells him her plan in his ear. Already in Edward's office, Maxon says he has brought a fencing teacher and that the practice will be on the training ground closer to sunset. The main character is glad that nothing is scheduled, because a person with such talent is worth listening to. The man asks if Lewis finally replied, to which the knight replies that she expressed her desire to deliver the letter personally. Maxon clumsily asks if he can take something from the Archduke's wardrobe, to which he nods, allowing him to take what he needs. The knight thanks the man and hopes everything goes well. Maxon gives the things to Lewis while she waits for her to change. The girl comes out in clothes that obviously fit her too loosely and asks what the hero thinks. The man approaches, rolls up the heroine's sleeves, and promises that next time he will bring her clothes of her size, to which the girl laughs and says it's still better than dresses. She asks to show what the heroine can do by taking off her jacket and preparing for battle. The main character ties her hair up, reminding herself that there is still a long time until sunset. The girl approaches her friend and accepts the sword from him. Lewis stands up and says she is excited because she hasn't been in danger for a long time. She shouts that she hopes Maxon will not disappoint her and prepares to attack. Suddenly and abruptly she lunges forward, carrying out an attack. The man barely dodges it, not letting himself be hit. He repels the heroine's attack and is surprised to realize that her skills have not disappeared anywhere. The girl, looking at the man, is happy that he has improved a lot. The main character notices that his posture has clearly become more stable, and that the man himself is bigger and stronger. They continue fighting as the girl throws a bunch of blows. Maxon has difficulty repelling the girl's attacks, blocking her sword. Later that night, they are sitting on a hill, and the protagonist praises her childhood friend because he holds the sword much better than before. Maxon rejoices at her praise, but is a little annoyed that he couldn't attack even once. Lewis falls onto the grass and says she feels like they have plunged into youth and became children again. The girl smiles at the sunset, feeling an emptiness in her chest. She thinks that everything that happened to her before is a lie. The main character turns to her friend again and praises him for the skill with which he handles the sword, but immediately tells him that throughout a year in perils, this is not a great achievement. Lewis asks if there are talented fighters in his squad who can protect him, to which she receives a negative answer. In response to the surprised question of how he survived then, the man explains that the forest has become strange, and not as Lewis remembers it. The girl remembers that she herself left the forest because back then, above all, she sought the light. She gets up from the ground, regretting that the old forest can no longer be returned, and assuming that if she returns, nothing is likely to change. The main character decides to simply hope that nothing bad happens. She stands up and offers to prepare for the Archduke's arrival. Edward looks at the new fencing teacher with confusion. Lewis assumes that the man is disappointed that she is a girl. The main character denies everything, holding the sword tightly in her hand. He looks at Lewis confused and doesn't know whether to pretend not to know her or immediately say that he guessed who she is. The girl looks at the Archduke's posture and comments that it is terrible. The main character decides to test what Edward is capable of. She explains that he needs to figure out what he is bad at and offers to try attacking her. Edward turns tense, sending help signals to Maxon with his eyes, but Lewis interrupts him and asks why he is standing like a pillar. She raises the sword, almost touching his throat, and scolds him for holding the sword incorrectly, asking him if he will continue to ignore her. The man holds the sword, not knowing how to strike without hurting the girl. He understands that if the heroine starts to yield, she will get angry, and invites her to take the sword in her hands too. The girl refuses, saying it's easy to dodge his blows. The man decides to do everything carefully and swing the sword slowly. To his surprise, he is simply pushed to the ground, which makes him fall to his knees on the grass. The hero doesn't understand what he did wrong until the girl tells him to try again. Lewis tells him to try touching the tip of her sword, and if he can, she will take his mask off. Edward was afraid of hurting the girl, so he was very slow, deciding that he needed to finish this quickly. Otherwise, the girl might get hurt, and he gets into a fighting stance. However, this time he simply misses. The man decides to try again, but not to hit the target, but to try to aim for the tip of the sword. The main character launches an attack, and everything is lost. The man turns around, stunned, not understanding what just happened. It was at that moment that Edward realized he was very wrong about Lewis. They worked until night, while Maction stood aside watching the magic light turn on. The man, now clearly exhausted, breathes heavily while standing. He wonders how he managed to dodge all her blows so easily. Lewis sighs as she approaches him and says they cannot simply part ways, extending her sword and telling him to stab the tip. The man listens to her and complies with her request. The main character takes off his mask and asks when Edward will recover. The man wipes the wet strands of hair off his face, marveling at how good Miss Louise is at fencing, and asks her to remain his teacher. Louise is surprised that the Archduke is not surprised at all, and asks if everything was so obvious. The main character apologizes for not taking the training seriously at first, because she thought it was revenge for the motel. The man is already in his thoughts, surprised that the Count has such a wife, but he still plays in parallel. He wonders if Count Cloth is crazy, or if he has several lives, and if resurrection with the help of black magic is possible. The Archduke remembers that Louise asked to keep the fact that she helped him a secret, and asks her if she is hiding her abilities from her husband. She confirms that her husband does not know that the girl can heal and wield a sword. Edward asks her why she hides such valuable skills. Louise explains that she has no particular reason to keep it a secret, and that initially she had no intention of hiding anything, although they did not marry because they knew each other well. She recalls that Layard needed a comfortable wife, and she strived for a different life. And the timing coincided perfectly. As soon as the girl became a noble person, she no longer needed a doctor to hold a sword. However, she was far from the type of wife Layard wanted, so she ended up here. And she tells the Duke that only Maction knows her abilities. Edward, with a smile on his face, assumes that he is the first in the capital to find out about this. The girl nods and asks him to keep her skills a secret. The man agrees, and at that moment Maction approaches them, having overheard a conversation about how Lewis healed the Archduke. The main character offers to tell the knight everything, since they are all in the same boat. The girl explains that she met Edward a long time ago in an abandoned house, nothing, and provided him with first aid. The Archduke offers the three of them dinner, inviting Lewis to his estate. The protagonist looks at the men surprised, not expecting to be invited. She smiles happily because she shared her secret with them and now feels free. The girl accepts and accompanies them to the estate. 10 days have passed since the first lesson. The maids whisper in surprise when they notice that the Archduke has not left the estate for these 10 days. Edward is training hard at the moment and turns around when he notices Louis's arrival. Today the girl arrived earlier because she was bored and averted her gaze from the man when she saw he was exercising shirtless. The Archduke immediately puts on his shirt upon seeing that the main character is embarrassed. The girl praises Edward because his tutoring is already bearing fruit. At first the man was very bad, but they worked on it and his skills improved a lot. She says that from tomorrow, her opponent will be Maction and coughs clumsily. The girl leans in and tells Edward that the maids are looking at them strangely, due to the fact that they constantly walk around the estate and do not go beyond its boundaries. It looks like a secret romance. Moreover, servants are not allowed to enter the training area, so it really sounds strange. However, Edward asks if this is what the main character wanted, because his goal was to provoke Layard. In fact, the girl thought it was working when Lard came home drunk one night. He told her that he had broken up with Liliana and realized that they were not right for each other, asking if Louis considers herself suitable as the Archduke's companion. All this time, the girl was silent when suddenly Layard pulled her towards him. The hero says he warned that His Majesty was dangerous, but falls silent mid-sentence. Suddenly, the man leaned down and kissed the girl on the forehead. He hugs his wife, expressing his joy at finally finding someone to talk to, and allowing her to invite and go to the Archduke. Louis has not yet fully understood whether he is jealous, or if he has his own reasons for behaving this way. Edward's voice distracts her from her thoughts, as he wonders if the maid's rumors really matter that much to him. The girl raises her head, notices how hot the sun is, and thinks she needs to change her clothes. The Archduke invites her out for a walk outside the estate. To her inquisitive gaze, he explains that tomorrow they can go choose some summer clothes and have a date. The girl asks him again, bewildered. The man says that since she is now his teacher, he wants to choose suitable clothes for their lessons. When the heroine thinks about refusing, he reminds her that he is still her lover, and that, therefore, it would be nice to go out with her from time to time. The girl nods thoughtfully and accepts a date. Then, she looks sternly at the Archduke and asks if he is going to evade his training this way. The girl forbids him from thinking about how to escape training and promises to solve it, this time with one hand. The next day, Edward is sitting in the boutique where he took Louis. A man runs around him, rejoicing that the Archduke finally brought the girl. He almost cries with joy, declaring that he had already started to think that His Majesty was after men. The man suggests that before it seemed to him that Edward and Maction were a real couple. The main character listens to all this and says that Filio, the owner of the shop, hasn't changed at all. The man abruptly changes behavior and asks how the Archduke could bring a married woman, to which he shrugs and replies that he is simply studying her preferences. Filio leans towards the man, telling him that he respects his preferences, but this relationship is not much. He falls silent when the girl leaves. The main character appears in a new suit, asks if it suits her. Edward freezes. He looks at the girl, then points and explains that these are his preferences. The boutique owner frowns because he has been setting trends for decades, and his assortment includes many beautiful outfits. But he was very surprised that the girl chose a men's suit instead of luxurious dresses. Filio doesn't understand how Edward can like her, while the man offers to look at Louis for more clothes. However, the salesman, casting aside all prejudices, presents another line of men's clothing, promising to tailor it to a girl's figure. The Archduke points out that it is quite hot now, so clothes will have to be changed frequently, and suggests buying them in advance. Filjo nods and says that the man brought so much money that it would be enough to buy the entire boutique, and asks to be allowed to bring other suits. Louis is embarrassed and explains that this is too much, because such an amount of money is enough to buy 10 plots. The girl asks not to spend so much money on her. The man says that these are just his fetishes and asks her to choose as she wishes. The hero explains that the money is his, but if she doesn't feel comfortable, she can also look at the dress because it will appear on the floor more than once. So it's better to take it with reserve. The girl agrees because it sounds convincing and follows Filio. She looks at the dresses, finding them all strange, and turns to Edward asking him to choose for her. The main character explains that before she only wore what Layard liked, so now she is a little lost. The man shakes his head, telling her to choose what she really likes, as he doesn't think his opinion will help much. When she asks why, he replies that he likes Louis as she is. The hero says he is not joking, but then notices an unbuttoned button on her shirt. He buttons it up, noticing that sometimes she can be very weak. The girl blushes, surprised that Edward can be gentle, and looks at him. The heroine blushes deeply and looks away from his face, seeing his hand in hers. She feels ashamed, withdraws her hand, and scolds herself for having strange thoughts. Louis blushes deeply, placing her hand on her heart, and feeling that it is about to jump out of her chest with excitement. Edward looks at the heroine confused when she abruptly leaves and explains that she is going to try on dresses. He takes care of her, not understanding what he did wrong. Filio explains that the ordered dresses will be delivered to the estate and asks them to come in while Edward jokes about her preferences. The young people leave the boutique and decide to take a walk. The girl takes the man by the arm, thanking him and promising to wear the dress with pleasure. The main character worries about acting too strangely when she notices a large crowd in front of the road. She asks Edward why there is such chaos when commoners notice their presence. People make way for them, and discussions and murmurs immediately arise around them. Now they walk calmly towards the place everyone was interested in, amidst whispers that they look good together. A girl reads an official announcement about a fencing competition. Edward, thoughtfully, says that an oracle will appear at the ceremony, while the girl wonders what is important about this. The Archduke explains that the imperial family has not announced it for several years. Louis suggests that they simply don't know what is happening in the country, while the man feels that all this is for a reason. And the emperor has his own plan. The main character asks if the Lensha sword will be presented to the winner, and she shares that she only knew about it from books. The girl resolutely looks at the participation conditions and memorizes them. The main character is already traveling in a carriage with Edward and asks him if anyone can participate in the competition. The man asks her surprised if she wants to participate, to which he receives a negative answer. The hero explains that there are no gender and status restrictions, and that people from all over the empire flock to the competition. But not everything is so simple. Society will probably get very excited if a modest woman in a relationship with Edward competes. But the man assures her that it's not scary because they constantly talk about him, and they will actually look very good together. The girl sighs. She still needs to explain everything to Layar somehow, but she remembers Edward's additional training, reminding him of it. Later that night, the main protagonist lies in bed, a small muscle that will surely ache for a couple of days. He suggests that the protagonist's desire for victory is much greater since she was interested in the Lensha sword. And not in vain, many legends are made about it. She resolutely looks at the conditions of participation and memorizes them. The main character remembers how he promised to glorify an adult girl from his childhood when he became emperor. The man understands that he never became emperor, but he can still glorify her name. Lensha was very unusual in his memories when they told him she would practice fencing with him. He was very surprised. Edward, when he was little, told Lensha that her figure was at his house. He looked at her with anticipation and surprise, not knowing what to expect. However, surprisingly, the classes were boring because he just swung his sword all day. One day, when Edward was distracted, the girl called him. Lensha asked why little Edward needed fencing. He replied that the heir, of course, must learn to hold a sword in his hands, because he will be a prince without knowing the basics. The girl asked him if he wanted to study on his own, as Edward shrugged, and replied that it was just his duties. Lensha smiled at the answer, suggesting the boy should just play in this case. The events have now moved to a new and regular banquet, where Louis sketches a forced smile under Edward's unimpressed gaze. The noble ladies immediately run towards the couple, calling them by name, and greet them. The girls immediately start showering Louis with sweet flatteries and compliments under her tense smile. Noticing Louis's discomfort, Edward says that he and the heroine must go out to the garden and say goodbye to the ladies. They go out to the garden, and while the girl complains about her tired face from the greetings, Edward smiles at her reaction. Louis, also recalling how many invitations she receives now, while the man tells her to enjoy the rumors. And it's true that many times it's not possible to live this. The main character exhales and realizes that Edward has a completely different mindset and is simply having fun. The girl notices that the labyrinthine garden they are walking through is much larger than usual, and if they take a wrong turn, they won't be able to get out. The hero thinks aloud, suggesting it would be bad if after their walk rumors spread until they are interrupted by the sounds of a couple in the corner who are busy with each other. Louis remembers that she occasionally attended balls with Edward, learning things she didn't know before. The fact is that every estate has a secret place for secret meetings, and this garden was one of them. She sighs, not understanding how she reached this point where she has to use places like this, and wondering if the mansion has the same places. The girl wonders if Liard was in the garden with many women, and if he used those places the same way as others. Today the hero came to the ball with his new mistress and never looked at Louis and Edward. Until now, the protagonist expected at least a drop of jealousy from Layard. But it seems he is completely preoccupied with his new mistress. The girl looked down sadly, thinking she was a fool to expect anything from him. Edward, noticing this, wanted to support the main character by starting a conversation, but he was interrupted by a voice from behind. Turning around, the heroes saw Layard with his new mistress, who greeted them arm in arm. The girl does Edward a favor, happy that they finally greeted each other properly. Realizing that she failed to impress the man, she turns to Louis. She informs the heroine that she will go to Layard's house at his invitation and offers to have dinner together. The lady addresses Layard and asks if it is a good idea, because in the future they can have more fun on the estate. Louis remains calm, but only outwardly. In her thoughts, She does not understand why the hell the woman who has become her husband's mistress behaves this way. Everyone wants to accompany her and have dinner with Layard. It seems like they were probing the ground. Previously, the girl thought that avoiding this was much more painful, but the desire not to participate in all this is stronger. Suddenly, Edward interrupts her train of thought and says that having dinner together is a great idea. The mistress is impressed that they will have a double date, while Layar looks at the main characters with disgust. He smiles at Lewis and asks for her opinion. She clenches her fists, decides not to run away anymore, and says that she already invited Edward on Sunday. The girl looks determinedly upwards and says that fortunately the day they met coincided. So a joint dinner is a great idea. Edward looks at the heroine with surprise and satisfaction, not expecting such decisive actions from her. Layard nods and bids farewell to his wife until the weekend because, according to him, he was not sure he would be able to see her before. When the couple leaves, Louise feels great relief as she was very nervous. While Edward praises her for such a counterattack, the girl thanks the hero for his help, saying that at first she expected to take refuge with him, because his mistress is likely to come to the estate to sleep with him, and it is difficult for Lewis to bear this atmosphere. The man, surprised, asks if Lallard sleeps with his mistress in the same place as with his wife, to which Lewis reassures him by telling him that happiness is far from his bedroom. Edward admits that this is worse than in a normal melodrama and offers to do the same as her husband and his mistress. When the main character asks him, the man offers to spend the night together. Lewis blushes from surprise, opens her mouth, and asks him again. During dinner, the mistress comments that she didn't know she would fall in love so much and wonders if His Highness is going to marry. Edward, thoughtfully, turns his gaze towards the main character and tells her that he respects the opinion of his loved one. Lewis chokes on such a statement and, when asked, says that everything is fine, realizing that in the end, this ridiculous situation had to happen. She clears her throat while the girl congratulates the couple Edward and Louise. Liar takes a glass and decides to report that it is raining heavily today, so a walk in the garden, that the main character wanted to see so much, will be burdensome. Edward smiles, shakes his head, and says that there is nothing wrong with it and that he can always visit him on his next visit, because he is sure that the Count invited him again. The man looks at the main character again, smiling, noting that the person next to him is much more important to him. The garden is beautiful, but it cannot compare to Miss Louise. She understands that the hero is simply enjoying her reaction and decides to try too. The girl sighs and, under surprised gazes, says that she is a little sad. The heroine says she really wanted to show Edward something, but the rain ruined her plans. Louise remembers that a rose began to bloom in the garden, but it stands out because its color reminds the heroine of the color of Edward's eyes. Every time she takes care of a rose, she remembers a man. Under the main character's smiling face, the girl does not understand how she manages to do this in her right mind. Edward asks Louis to suggest the variety of this rose, and, under her inquisitive gaze, he explains that he also wants to plant one. If a girl remembers the hero while taking care of a rose, then he also wants to think of Louis while taking care of the same flower. The protagonist awkwardly pretends that she liked it, laughing at the disappointed look of her husband's mistress. Suddenly, Layar leaves his food, suggesting they go to the bedrooms since it is already dark. The man's mistress happily agrees to this, while Lewis looks away in disappointment. She thought she could pretend not to notice anything, but it turned out to be harder than it seemed. Suddenly, Edward takes the main character's hand in an attempt to support her. He smiles and asks Lewis to lead him to the bedroom. Later that night, having changed clothes, the protagonist arrives in her room. She blushes and remembers Edward's words that he will stay on the estate for the night. Louise remembers that at first, she was very surprised by the protagonist's decision, while the man explained to her that he could not stand aside since his mistress remained on the estate. Edward looked inquisitively at the heroine, asking if they had enough guest rooms, while she, blushing, explained to him that this was not the case. Seeing her reaction, the hero reminded them of their agreement, and the fact that they did not have the same relationship as she might have imagined upon the girl's denial. Louise, standing in the room, remembers that it was difficult, but she could endure thanks to Edward. She exhaled in relief, because it was nice to know that in the next room there was a person who was on her side. The girl with a calm soul approached the window, suddenly saw silhouettes through it, and froze. The heroine saw Layard and his mistress running and closing the curtains in horror. She stands there with disgust, remembering how when she first moved to this estate, she liked the wide view from this window. During the day, it seemed to fill the whole world with light and made her think only of hope, expectations, happiness, and a bright future. The girl realized that she had been deeply mistaken in the past until a knock on the door interrupted her introspection. The protagonist does not understand who is coming at this hour, but when she opens the door, she sees Edward. She asks what happened, while the man says that it is difficult for him to sleep in an unfamiliar place. The hero, despite the darkness of the night, wonders if he will be able to spend time with Louis. Given the girl's doubts, the man explains that it is at night when it is customary for lovers to spend time together. The main character shakes her head and says that she does not want to develop this type of relationship with him. Edward understands this, and under the heroine's inquisitive gaze, leans down and lowers his voice. He explains that he feels like there is someone in the area and is trying to find out if the heroes are together or not. The man wants to continue the game because, after all, he received an invitation to be Miss Louise's lover. After thinking for a while, the girl lets Edward in. They enter the chambers and are left alone with each other. Louise asks the hero to wait a little and promises to return later. The girl turns her attention to Edward, admiring him, accidentally catching his gaze. She blushes and realizes that the atmosphere has now become dangerous. Louis quickly turns around, saying she needs to go out for a while to get some fresh air, while the man reports that it is not the best weather for walking. The main character approaches the window and explains that she is not going anywhere, but simply opening the window leading to the terrace. The man looks at this and says that something is worrying her. Edward wonders if he is just a tool with which Louis is going to change her husband's heart, or something more. The girl says she considers the hero her friend. The man sighs because he remembers that the heroine does not avoid her friends in this way, and even holds Maxim's hand. Louis, moving away from the hero, explains that if they are too close to him, he will think that they are really having an affair, even though she has a husband. The main character, looking at the girl's back, gives no guarantee that her husband will change if they don't pretend to be lovers. The girl finally turns to the man, telling him that thanks to supposedly being lovers, she can have fun spending time with Maxim and Edward, and this makes her happy. The main character nods, accepting the girl's decision. Louis opens the window when, suddenly, the wind blows the curtains away from the window, and the rain pours into the room. Edward immediately approaches the girl from behind to help her. Tying the curtains, they say that if the Count changes his mind and comes to her chambers, then everything can change. The main character shakes her head and says that this certainly will not happen. And Edward wonders why, because this is common when spouses go to each other's rooms. Once the curtains are done, he withdraws his hands and explains that you never know what can happen on a day as provocative as today. Louis shakes her head, saying that this certainly won't happen because after her first night with Layard, they didn't get a single one. Edward looks confusedly at the main character and asks if this is due to the marriage contract, to which he receives a negative answer. The girl, with a sad look, says that she is far from beautiful and asks the hero to close his eyes. The man complies with her request, waiting for what the heroine will say. Louise takes off her long robe and throws it on the floor. She takes Edward's hand to her back and tells him to touch her. The man immediately tenses up and places his second hand on the girl's back. He feels the large scars on Louise's back and wonders what kind of life she lived. The protagonist explains that she didn't know how big these scars were. She still sometimes remembers Layard's face at the moment he saw them, and now she understands that at that moment she became a pampered flower for him. Louis remembers the past, and although it was awkward when Layard saw her body, the man kept a serious face and uttered sweet speeches. Even then, the heroine noticed that he seemed to be in a hurry with her, and she didn't understand if it had always been like this. The girl decided to reach out her hand to him, but the hero dodged her touch. She noticed that his actions were different from his words, and that there were no more gentle touches or looks. Louis at that moment felt his rejection of her body. The girl realized that this night was only for duty and nothing more. After this incident, she began to think about it often. The girl suggested that her body was like an ill-cultivated flower, on which not even bees and butterflies landed. Edward immediately objected with a frown, starting to deny all her words. Louis assured him with a smile that there was no need to reassure her, and that everything was fine, because it was natural that he wouldn't like that appearance. The man, frowning, began to tell his story of how, when he was a child, his surroundings were full of beautiful things. Since childhood, Edward liked beauty and aesthetics. All people with objects around them were beautiful. Some even said that the hero could become a bully, although they were just expressing their concern. However, after he grew up, he naturally corrected himself. But there was one thing that people did not notice. The main character had too high standards and was no longer interested in mediocre beauty. He puts the nightgown back on the main character and explains that after becoming an adult, the only beauty he thought about was a girl. The main character immediately denies it because the world is full of beauty, and it is probably because the man did not look closely enough at her wounds. The hero will definitely change his mind. She is sure that he will also find her unpleasant and will not want to touch her like Layard. In response to her words, Edward grabs the heroine by the waist and explains that there is only one reason why he will not touch her, and that is that they cannot touch each other without permission. The main character lets the girl go, saying that, moreover, if you compare her to a flower, then flowers seem too weak to him. As far as he knows, there is not a single flower in the world capable of controlling such a sword. No matter how many years they train, he highly doubts they will manage to defeat Lewis. The man explains with a smile that he is not saying this to console Lewis, but that he sincerely believes so. The girl hesitantly thanks the hero, looking down. She decides to bring up the topic by saying that it is time for Edward, since the servants should now think that they spent time together. The man asks her, surprised, if the heroine's rating is too low for him. He sighs sadly and says that only half an hour has passed until the main character understands why this is not enough. Edward shakes his head, pointing out that it's a pity she can prove otherwise. Lewis promises to prove it clumsily standing next to him. The man sighs because anyway, since the owner of the room told him to leave, he will leave. The main character leaves, wishing the girl good night and reminding her not to forget to close the window. After the man leaves, the girl sits on the bed and thinks about what happened. Edward, upon returning to his chambers, takes a mysterious vial out of his pocket. The man drinks it while suggesting that his condition has worsened. He places his hand on his chest, blushing slightly and thinking that it will be harder for him to sleep tonight. The next day he walks with Lewis through the garden, enjoying the clear day. Edward notices the red roses and leans towards them, asking if the color of her eyes is really similar to the color of the roses. The main character quickly turns around, claiming they're not similar at all, and she only said that phrase because it suited her mood. A man smiles at a girl and tells her that, nevertheless, he is in a good mood. To the girl's questions, the hero replies that what he liked most about that garden was that every time she saw these flowers, she would remember him. Edward smiles, happily standing next to the roses and looking at Lewis. The main character realizes that Edward really has eyes like rubies. It occurs to her that they are much more beautiful than roses when the girl quickly turns around. Chasing away those thoughts, Edward smiles happily and a little surprised, asks why the heroine doesn't deny it when she says with a sigh that she just got used to his slippery words. The man turned around, directing his attention to the roses when the girl realized that, as Edward said, every time she looked at a red rose, she would remember him. In the next fencing practice, Edward was already fighting with Maction when he suggested taking a break. The main character nodded, approaching the knight. The hero praises His Majesty for his greatly improved skills in such a short time, and Edward agrees and says that Lewis is truly a capable teacher. Maction remembers that when he was a child, he also studied with Lewis on days when his teacher was busy. So Edward wants to know about Lewis's childhood. When suddenly the main character crosses through them, she walks towards the men with a real sword while Edward looks at him surprised. The main character explains that today they are fighting with real swords because a swordsman competition will soon take place. The main character jokingly asks Maction to hire an assassin to train him. Edward noticed that, for the past few days, the classes had started later than usual, and he wondered if something had happened to the girl. She confirms it, but says that everything will be resolved soon, so there is nothing to worry about. While the main characters chat about the upcoming Rivend family banquet, Maction watches them. The knight noticed that these two had been acting strangely for the past few days. Edward offers to make a bet for the main character on whether the lavender will bloom or not. When asked what they are betting on, the man offers a wish. Louis accepts Maction's inquisitive look. He tenses up thinking that this couple has something dangerous. the main character returns to the estate and meets Layard, who asks her surprised why she didn't immediately go to the banquet with the Archduke. She explains to him that she needs to change her dress, and the man invites the girl to change clothes and come down so they can go together. Louis goes upstairs and accepts his proposal when he calls her again. The hero realizes that in recent days, the girl seemed happy. The girl says that everything is because she had a lover, just as Liard said. She expresses her joy, and when the main character turns around and leaves, her face changes dramatically, becoming dissatisfied. Louis is already traveling in the carriage with her husband and remembers what happened an hour earlier. Edward told her that something interesting would happen at today's banquet. Miss Isilla would receive a marriage proposal. Under the main character's inquisitive gaze, he reminds her that they had dinner with her not long ago. The girl remembers that Isilla is her husband's mistress. Edward shrugs. I guess Count Layard has fun even with women like that. As they drive towards the banquet, Louis looks at her husband and wonders silently if he will be all right after hearing about the proposal. The couple gets out of the carriage, and the man wishes the protagonist a good time and says goodbye. The protagonist decides to act and stops her husband, eager to talk. The girl asks him to call her if he needs her, because something bad might happen today. To her surprise, Layard understands what she means by asking if she is referring to the proposal to Isilla. The girl, bewildered, asks him how he knows, while the hero explains that the family's second son, Rival, will propose marriage to Isilla. The man notices Louis's sadness and takes her chin, asking her not to make that face because the girl was only his mistress, and they enjoyed each other for a while. He reassures the girl by telling her that, even though it seems like his mistresses are eager to take the girl's place, they understand everything perfectly. In his opinion, no one can become a real wife like the main character. He explains that for him, fun is just a dream, but marriage is a reality. And even if he wanders around for a while, he always has a reason to come home. Says Layard, and the main character is having fun, because when the sun rises, the dream will end. The girl stays behind, not understanding what she expected from her husband and why she clings to him. Suddenly, a familiar voice calls her, and she turns around to see Edward. He smiles and asks her why she remained still for so long. Perhaps Layard was right. Everything was a dream, because since Edward appeared in the girl's life, it seemed like she had turned into a wonderful dream. The main character picked up the sword she had put down again. Every day became hectic, as if she were receiving compensation for the days she spent alone. Edward was a man she would prefer to see in a dream rather than in reality. She looks at him, and she wonders if this is really a fleeting dream. The main character leans abruptly towards the girl and asks what happened, and why she has been silent for so long. She tries to justify herself when the man realizes that something happened. Edward decides to bring up the topic by reminding the girl of their joint bet about whether the flowers will bloom in the band's field or not. The man suggests going there immediately because the banquet hall will probably be very boring now. The main character offers to take a seat before people arrive and offers his hand to the girl. They find themselves in a magnificent garden with a wonderful view of flowers. The girl notices that the buds have not yet opened and laughs. She asks him if he thinks she won, looking at him with a smile. Edward blushes, looks at the girl, and does not answer. Louise bends down to look at the flowers and says they are still beautiful and should be even more beautiful when they bloom. The main character understands that Edward also knows it is too early for them to bloom and thinks he did it on purpose to cheer her up. She asks him if she can think of a wish. The hero apologetically shakes his head, replying that he cannot admit defeat at the girl's surprised look. He says that an unforeseen event might occur. Louis jumps up, pinching the man's shoulder and telling him that he must keep his promises, to which the hero smiles and asks her to treat him carefully because he still has to participate in the swordsman competition. The main character smiles at his light jokes and cheerful atmosphere. The girl wants them to double the amount of training next week, to the indignation of His Majesty. She understands that when she starts smiling next to Edward, the heroine wonders if this dreamlike relationship will soon break, and if they will still be able to be good friends. The man looks at her taking her hand, while the girl realizes that they can never be friends. Edward offers to correct the result of the argument when the girl turns to him inquisitively. The main character moves her hand, telling Louis to look ahead. She turns around in anticipation and surprise and asks what just happened. Louis realizes with surprise that there were only buds, and now there is a whole flower bed of beautiful blooming flowers. Edward says he won, looking pleased at the surprised girl. The main character turns to the man and wonders what kind of relationship they have. The hero asks to hear her wish. The girl agrees, ready to listen to His Majesty's wishes. She blushes, realizing that the atmosphere between them has changed, and begins to guess what kind of wish Edward has. When they are abruptly interrupted by a voice shouting discontentedly in the middle of the garden. And Sela runs out from around the corner, leaving a man and telling him that everything is over between them because she is dating someone else. When the man asks to hear it, the girl shouts that he himself said he doesn't see her as a woman. And that's why she asks the hero not to come near her. The main characters, hiding behind a tree, observe this scene. Recognizing the main participants in today's marriage proposal, Edward notices that the atmosphere is not entirely suitable for proposing marriage, while he draws Louis closer so they cannot be seen. The girl blushes at his actions, remembering that she constantly finds herself in such situations when she is next to Edward. The main character notices how the girl blushes, holding her by the shoulder. He smiles, satisfied at her reaction. And Zila and the man meanwhile begin to argue again. The girl is discontent because when she is not around, the heroes scold her freely. The man tries to justify himself by saying that it was a normal fight between academy mates. If he had spoken about the girl, people would obviously have started speaking ill of her. That's why the hero spoke ill of marriage, but he didn't want to hurt Zila. The girl is not impressed by this excuse and angrily starts leaving the man. Louis peeks out from behind the tree to see if the youngsters have left, feeling uncomfortable in Edward's arms. And Sela turns to the man and asks if he knows why Layard is so popular with girls. She explains with disgust that, at least, he is polite. He softly says what you want to hear at the right moment. The girl says that all she asks for is basic courtesy and wants to have the illusion of a pleasant relationship, where her partner at least pretends to be polite to her. The man objects because the Count is a married man and asks if she really thinks she could be truly happy next to the Count. And if she tells him she knows that what is happening now is not love. The girl doesn't understand why the boy started talking about this, because he isn't that kind to her, not even compared to this adulterous man. After all, he couldn't even tell his academy friends that he had a mistress when the hero suddenly kneels down. The man proposes marriage, promising never to hurt her again, as the girl falls into a stupor of silence. And Sela gets embarrassed and asks if he is really saying this sincerely, because she is just an immoral woman, and if they marry, then all sorts of rumors can spread. The hero resolutely replies that he does not care, because being with a girl is much more important to him than some rumors. The girl wonders if she says yes. The hero will carefully listen to what she accepts. The main characters peek out from behind a tree and see the couple starting to leave. Edward sighs, happy that this situation finally has a happy ending, when suddenly Louis slips off the tree onto the lawn. He sits down next to her and asks if everything is all right while the girl thinks she is pathetic. The main character remembers the girl's words that Laird is polite and softly says what you want to hear at the right moment. While hiding, she heard how Laird was with his mistresses, and the worried girl found her happiness. She lowers her head, thinking how foolish she is, and tells this to Edward. The heroine looks sadly at the ground, feeling as if she had been hit over the head with a gun. The girl remembers again the situation that just happened and wonders why even his lovers understand what kind of relationship awaits them with Layard. But she doesn't. After all, even knowing the truth, the main character still persistently ignored him because she believed that the moment she admitted that Layard's love for the girl had faded, she would feel very hurt. Louis starts telling Edward that she was very stupid this whole time because she clung to the words of a real wife and thought that they wouldn't hurt her, because she is a wonderful wife and the only one who can overcome his infidelity. With this attitude towards herself, the girl only continued to mock herself, pulling herself out of her thoughts. She tells Edward with a smile that her marriage was a complete failure. The man reassures the heroine by telling her that she was just unlucky and that she can't always make the right choice. Everyone makes mistakes but then learns from them, and the main character's choice simply led her to pain. But the man assures her that it is not her fault. Louis smiles and says she doubts Edward has ever made the same stupid mistake she has, to which the man thanks her for her high opinion of him. The main character denies his words because even today he hired a mage to win their bet. The girl points out that this is not an entirely fair victory, when the man realizes that the rules do not forbid it. Lewis wonders how expensive it was to hire such a mage when she realizes that Edward wants to express his wish. The main character invites the girl to spend the night at his estate. The girl asks the man again, not understanding how to react and how to feel about such a proposal. She asks the man to wait because it was too unexpected, and previously they had agreed that they had a different relationship. Edward leans towards her surprised, explaining that lately he has been training at night, and he wanted to ask the girl to train together so it would be more productive. He sees the girl's reaction, who agrees to his request, and the man blushes, teasing him, asking him what he was thinking about before. The main character continues joking, noting how active Lewis turns out to be. The girl shouts, embarrassed that such a sentence can be misinterpreted, so she needs to formulate her thoughts better. Edward apologizes, taking the girl's hand and walking beside her. The hero wonders what would happen if it wasn't a joke, and he was saying everything seriously. Lewis immediately blushes and turns around to see if it's a joke. But when she sees the man's serious face, she falls silent. The girl asks, surprised, if what he says is true, receiving an affirmative answer. Embarrassed, she withdraws her hand, saying that she will fulfill the wish the man won in a bet. The protagonist remembers that, in any case, there are only a few days left before the swordsman competition, so it is necessary to train. The youngsters decide to quickly return to the banquet hall, while Edward walks beside the girl with a smile. Lewis approaches her husband, who upon seeing the girl asks her to wait for him because he wants to stay for a while. To her surprise, she simply remains silent and says that this does not concern her. A girl with an indifferent face informs that she is not spending the night at home today. Lillard is surprised by this behavior and asks her again, but he doesn't wait for an answer because the Archduke approaches Lewis from behind and asks if they are done talking. The main character looks happy next to Edward, but when she turns to her husband to ask if he cares, her face again becomes indifferent. The main character wants the Count to have a good evening, taking the girl's hand. The man wants to have a good time in return while watching a young couple walk away. He sees Lewis smiling happily, holding Edward's hand, and clearly doesn't like it. Having reached the training ground already, the Archduke praises Lewis with admiration for her skills in provoking the Count, since they have increased significantly since the last time. The girl thanks Edward for his help, squeezes a real sword in her hand, and asks if everything will be all right. After all, it is already dark, and the man asks to train with real swords. The main character asks, bewildered, if he is going to kill his student. The girl asks him to tense up just in case, because she can heal common wounds, but she cannot sew back what was cut off. The man hopes this is a joke, now with a serious face, asking if he definitely won't kill her. Noticing that when Louis takes the sword in her hands, she becomes a completely different person. The main character asks him to focus, suddenly attacking him. The heroes strain to block his blow, constantly wondering why he doesn't use cunning tricks, or useless ones. The girl uses speed and agility, where weight class doesn't matter, and she loves it. Edward doesn't understand and wonders how it happened that she got into his heart. He supposes that was the day she healed him, or the moment an odd agreement was concluded. The man recalls the first time he learned about her fencing skills, while the girl calls him by name. The main character says that she watches him for these few minutes of the fight, and sees that he cannot concentrate. The hero, smiling, says he will concentrate, gripping the sword tighter in his hands, and abruptly attacking Lewis. The girl did not expect such an attack. She looks at Edward, noticing his beauty, and gets distracted. She stumbles, and at the last moment manages to block the man's attack. The main character smiles and asks if she was looking at him now. Taking advantage of her confusion, Edward trips her, causing the girl to drop her sword. He grabs her by the waist and the nape of the neck, so she doesn't fall, and tells her he won. Lewis looks away embarrassed, muttering that maybe he shouldn't hug her and that she will fall without getting hurt, mentally scolding herself for getting distracted by his face and leaving reality. The main character replies that he cheated and knows it, but he doesn't let the girl go. Suddenly, the girl raises her hand to touch Edward's face. The main character is surprised by this, calls the girl by name to go for a walk, and releases her face embarrassed. The heroine recoils sharply from him, apologizing and trying to find an excuse for her actions. Confused, she tries to quickly think of something to say under Edward's calm gaze. Edward brings his hand to her face, asking her to touch him properly. He lets her do it since she doesn't mind. The girl withdraws her hand and promises she won't touch him again because it was just a mistake. The man realizes that the heroine seems very annoyed and begins to tell her that previously he was taught by a very talkative master. As his teacher said, if a girl is upset with a man, she should be given a sword. Is he the man she wants to stab, or does she want to protect him? Or perhaps the man is not even worthy of her pointing her sword at him. The main character hands the previously dropped sword to the girl and asks what she thinks of him. Lewis explains that before becoming a normal girl, she was a swordsman, and for swordsmen this makes no sense. Edward is glad he is not the person the girl wants to kill and offers to continue training tomorrow, because it is difficult for both of them to concentrate. The man asks if she really wants to sleep alone in the annex, because the main building is full of rooms, to which the girl resolutely agrees. The butler asks Edward if he is really going to do what he previously asked for. The man informs that if the medicines are not effective, it is worth increasing the dose because the main character cannot sleep at night, and goes to practice fencing. When His Majesty tries to ignore him, the butler says that for the past few days he saw Edward training until dawn. The hero says he perfectly understands that His Majesty is training to be on par with the Emperor, but that he might get sick if he neglects his health. The main character interrupts the butler and tells him that he is more like a child and can take care of himself. Benjamin explains that after returning from perils, the man's condition has worsened even more, and he cannot simply stand still and watch His Majesty overexert himself. Edward sighs. They say he just doesn't sleep well, and if someone finds out, they will think he is sick with something fatal, to which the butler objects since insomnia for several years is a fatal disease. The main character ignores the man, saying that due to the butler's complaints, the desire to get out of the way completely disappears. Benjamin is deep in thought because 7 years ago the former emperor suffered a mysterious death. Since then, attempts have been made on His Highness every day. It was because of this that his sleep first became restless and then turned into insomnia. It was painful to watch how His Highness could barely bear it, so Benjamin's concern was not unreasonable now. The emperor was pushing Edward too hard. The man, noticing his butler's enthusiasm, assured him that he could handle everything himself. The hero said with a serious face that he was almost ready to fight back, while Benjamin sighed in resignation. Edward asks if the butler brought what the man previously asked for, to which he nods, and hands him a tray with dishes. Meanwhile, Lewis walks restlessly around the room because she is not sleepy. The girl turns towards the door when she hears a knock and calls Edward. The man asks if he can come in and says he was informed that the heroine was not brought water. Lewis wonders why Edward personally came to her for such nonsense, while he excuses himself by saying that the estate workers are embarrassed. In fact, it was just an excuse to see Lewis. He serves her the tray when the girl notices the sweets in the bowl. The main character eats it, while Edward asks what the room's bed is like, and if it is comfortable for her. The girl replies that the bed here is even more comfortable than at home. When Edward asks why the heroine could not sleep, Lewis, looking down, says she is worried about being in the room. And it's not surprising that many things happened that day. There is probably an avalanche of thoughts in the girl's head right now. On second thought, perhaps one of the reasons for her insomnia was precisely Edward. The main character says she will leave if the girl wants to be alone. Lewis invites him to share the conversation with her, if the man doesn't mind. Seeing Edward's surprise, she explains that when she is alone, everything becomes too quiet to feel comfortable. His Majesty agrees to stay with the girl until she falls asleep. Louise realizes that the room she is spending the night in has been used by someone. It doesn't look like it has been abandoned for a long time. The main character nods, and they say that when she first arrived at this mansion, she lived here for some time. In response to the girl's surprised question about why the hero suddenly left the main building and came here, he explains that he needed a place where he could hide. Lewis nods tensely to indicate that she understands. The main character, smiling, says she didn't know that being next to Lewis, this place would feel so wonderful. Edward looks at Louise, realizing that he doesn't know much about her, and starts asking the girl what she likes. The main character asks the girl about small things they hadn't shared before, and about such obvious things, for example, whether the heroine likes swords and flowers. The girl was also able to tell small secrets, such as the fact that Maxion was a crybaby when he was a child. The girl herself, without realizing it, fell asleep during the conversation and only woke up when the sun's rays fell on her face. The main character, looking near her bed, thought Edward had left. but saw him sitting and sleeping near her. Lewis gets out of bed, approaches the man and sits next to him. The girl curiously examines his sleeping face and reaches out her hand. The main character carefully tucks her hair behind her ear while the man is still sleeping. Finally, Lewis asks her question and asks the sleeping Edward what he likes. They talked for a long time, but only now did she realize that she hadn't asked him that question in response. The girl realizes that there are still many things she doesn't know about Edward and laughs when she realizes she broke her promise not to touch him again. She runs her finger across his cheek when suddenly Edward takes her hand. The next moment, Lewis finds herself on the floor while the man hovers over her. The main character asks rudely who sent the girl. Lewis screams that no one sent her. Unexpectedly for her, she notices Edward's unfocused gaze, as he isn't looking anywhere. A second later, he falls back asleep on Lewis. The girl, blushing, feels the temperature of his body, the beating of his heart. His body, which sinks and sinks with every breath, and she even smells the scent of a rose. She remembers that this already happened during their first encounter. The girl turns her gaze back to the hero, thinking that even in an unconscious state, he doesn't allow himself to relax, and wondering what kind of life Edward lived. The main character pushes the man away and realizes he is still holding her hand. Moreover, he hugged her so tightly that she couldn't free herself. Deciding it will be difficult to lay a man down with one hand from the floor, she reaches for the blanket and pulls it up from the bed. The protagonist covers herself with Edward while looking out the window and sees the sunrise. The girl smiles, leans back next to the man, and mentally wishes him good night. Later in the afternoon, Edward wakes up thinking that it had been a long time since he slept so peacefully. When his vision finally focuses, he sees Lewis sleeping in front of him. The man abruptly gets up, not understanding what this situation is, and remembering that they fell asleep in a completely different position. Due to sudden movements nearby, the heroine frowns while sleeping while Edward is touched by this. The girl yawns, opens her eyes, and asks why His Majesty isn't sleeping. In response to Edward's questions about why the heroine was sleeping on the floor, the girl explains that while she was sleeping, the man grabbed her wrist and she had no chance to get out. The main character apologizes, but wonders why she is so careless. Because if he had dark intentions, what would she do? Lewis replies that the hero is nothing like that person, and asks him suspiciously if he was really thinking about something like that. Edward jokes that he thought about it, but he is too much of a gentleman to do such a thing. The man says he will return to the main building and offers to have lunch with the girl in an hour after asking her to continue yesterday's training. Their conversation is interrupted by Maction, standing in the hallway with bewilderment on his face. Under the knight's stern gaze, Edward remembers that he had a morning appointment with a man he fell asleep on. Maction, with a serious face, wishes happiness to Lewis and Edward, asking him to take care of his old friend, even though they are having a simple love affair. His Majesty tries to rectify the situation, explaining that the knight misunderstood everything when. In shock, he suggests that Edward was simply playing with Lewis's heart. After several minutes of explanation, Maction realizes that he has thought too much. Edward expresses his wish for Miss Louise and Count Layard to be legally divorced, to which Maction agrees, because he also wants Louise and His Majesty to have not just an affair, but an official relationship. The main character shakes his head, saying he is not talking about that at all, but that if they were to carry out their plan, being the Count's wife, Miss Louise would be in danger. The knight nods, understanding the situation, but pointing out that the Count will not divorce Louise simply because he married her for some reason. Edward says with a smile that he is going to prepare bait, something that the Count will find desirable. But first, he will ask for the divorce. Maction asks, surprised, what kind of bait this is, and what the Archduke means, while His Majesty assures him that the knight also knows what kind of bait it is, something that no one in the Empire can refuse. Time passed quickly, and the classification stage of the sword competition began. Edward stands in the crowd, noticing that there are many people, and not remembering that the festival has always been like this. Lewis asks the hero why he is participating in the final, to which he explains that those who returned from perils are subject to an exclusive right. Suddenly, a man spots a store with people betting on winnings and invites the main character to try. Edward offers to bet on him as the girl's student, which she is not enthusiastic about. His Majesty is upset because the girl doesn't want to bet on him, while Maction calms him down by promising to bet on him. Lewis says it's time to go, as she said before, and says goodbye to Maction and Edward. The man asks the knight if he knows anything about why Louis has been so busy lately. Maction, thoughtfully, remembers that the other day the girl was busy taking care of the garden, because now is the time for the roses to bloom. The main character smiles satisfied and asks what seats they have, to which the knight replies that he reserved seats with a good view. Edward is surprised that the audience is so happy, because it is barely the first day of the tournament when Maction reports that a well-known person in the alleys is about to come out. The first participant in the classification stage competition is announced over the loudspeaker. This is Walton. He had good strength, so people followed him. The next competitor in the competition was Benny, a man covered with a mask. The crowd in the stands began to discuss the size difference between the two opponents, immediately assuming Benny's defeat. The loudspeaker notes that it is unusual for the participant to have come with a mask. It assumes that this is the recluse lord's plan to hide his true identity, or that the hero simply came to the competition secretly from his parents. Edward does not believe she is asking why he participates with a mask, while Maction explains that, in such competitions, they sometimes do this because there are many hunters aiming for the winner's prize. The start of the first competition is announced while the fighters prepare to attack. Baltian sees that his opponent does not have a single muscle and doubts he is of age, but he doesn't object to an easy victory in the first round. The man is confident that the fight will be easy and he won't even have to strain himself. A second later, Valthian's sword tip flies to the side while he freezes. The stands are outraged by how such a fighter could lose to a boy. The hero doesn't understand how this could have happened because he simply lost stupidly. People shout that it was a fixed match because everything ended too quickly. Meanwhile, Edward and Maction cannot assess the enemy's skills because everything ended too quickly. Valthian thinks that Benny used some kind of trick because he defeated him too quickly. The man runs after the guy. The hero tries to grab the masked man when he dodges asking him what he is trying to do. Baltian says he just saw Benny for the first time and asks him to take off his mask because he hasn't seen such capable people in a long time. The man says he wants to learn a couple of things from the hero and asks him to have a drink with him. Benny decides to give some quick advice, pointing out that the man's initial movements were unnecessary and were full of flaws, after immediately fleeing to the disgusted shouts of Baltian that he doesn't have to endure such humiliation from a boy who hasn't even reached maturity. And his voice, physique, and behavior indicate that he looks like a girl. The man, putting two and two together, realizes with surprise that it was a girl. Meanwhile, Louis listens at the desk, and it turns out that she is Benny. She mentally apologizes to Edward for participating in the tournament without his knowledge. But what is at stake is something very dear to her, specifically her mother's sword. The girl is in a hurry and leaves the tournament venue, remembering that she needs to water the roses. That same evening, Baltian excuses himself by saying that he took the rusty sword by mistake. And that's why he lost so absurdly. The man, furious at the reproaches of the people in the forest and the fact that the girl lost, slams his mug on the table. Silence reigns, and Luli decides not to bother the hero anymore, trying to change the subject. When suddenly, Valthian jumps up announcing that he is going to get drunk today to the now cheerful shouts of the people in the forest. Louis takes care of the flowers by catching the caterpillars that eat her flower bed. She collects them in a bucket, taking them off the rose leaves. The girl, satisfied with her work, admires the flowers with a smile. The heroine thinks of Edward while looking at the flowers and decides to fix their relationship at the end of the competition. Already at training, Louis believes that the classification stage will be very long due to the large number of participants, and she is happy that in a couple of weeks Edward's first battle will take place. The man is upset because after the competition, he will no longer have a reason to see the heroine so often, and invites her to watch other competitions together. The girl is confused because she also has to participate in the competition, while Edward assures her that he just wants advice about one participant. The main character says that Benny won in a fraction of a second, so it is very difficult for him to assess his skills. That's why the man wants Louis to analyze him. She refuses, trying to find an excuse, because so far she cannot directly say that she is participating in the contest. Edward nods and says that Benny will fight twice more to have enough time when the main character refuses. The man looks at the main character with surprise and realizes that Louise is behaving strangely. She tries to invent something, saying that she has a similar situation. The girl falls silent because if she tells the truth now, the man will think that she betrayed him, first trained him to win, and then signed up to participate behind his back. The protagonist decides to disguise the truth by saying that they share physical contact. Edward freezes in shock and asks if he heard correctly. Lewis, to his surprise, explains that this is a kind of exercise, in a sense, similar to what she has with Edward. The man believes that she has found a new lover to whom she gives her body. The main character believes that the girl is not the type of person who can be especially received by someone on the side, and asks her if that is what she is thinking about. The girl nods weakly, and Edward is perplexed by this news. Lewis, thinking that the man guessed about her participation in the tournament, starts apologizing for not having told him sooner. The man thinks the heroine has a new lover and asks why she did this because she has Edward. The main character replies that she wanted to entrust it to him, but this decision was better for her. Surprising the man, she apologizes again. She thinks he is probably angry about this situation. The hero thinks what kind of scoundrel he is, that Miss Louise considers him better than Edward. The man assumes that her new lover is Carlo, a mercenary with outstanding skills and appearance who often appears on the pages of romance magazines. Edward clarifies his assumption and receives a positive response. The man says that he will definitely hurt her, since Carlo has long been known for his affairs, and asks her to reconsider. Lewis is surprised that the main character thinks she will lose in the classification stage this time, and asks him if he really thinks so. The hero nods and replies that he does not agree with her decision. Edward informs that this time he will not be able to support the main character. He asks the girl to change her mind and change her opinion. Lewis sighs, pointing out that she has been careless for a long time and therefore can handle it alone. The girl says it is no longer necessary to teach someone who does not trust his teacher. She leaves without letting the man explain anything to her. Already during the tournament, Edward sighs deeply while the stands chant Benny's name. Maction asks if His Majesty is all right, because the man is not at all focused on the fight. The main character asks for advice on whether he should apologize. A whole month has passed since the fight with Lewis. Maction states that it is worth it. He just needs to give the girl time to release her anger, although he doesn't know why the youngsters quarreled. Meanwhile, Lewis, under Benny's mask, analyzes the enemy and realizes that the opponents have become stronger, and she simply cannot use the same technique with everyone. The loudspeaker says in surprise that Benny is using new moves that the stands had not seen before. The girl easily breaks Carlo's sword while standing in front of him. Edward applauds Benny's good skills, while Maction begins to suspect something, looking at the man's mask on the stage. After the tournament, Lewis flees through the alleys, is heard being chased, and keeps the mask to hide her identity. She stops dead when she hears Maction's familiar voice calling her name. The girl removes the mask and realizes that it is only her childhood friend. The main character knew from the beginning that he would notice her movements and reveal her. He exhales with a calm soul because he is not at all surprised that Lewis was Benny, to which the girl asks why Edward didn't tell her anything, because that's why they had disagreements. In response to Maction's questions, the girl explains that the hero disdained her fencing skills. She says that the man confidently stated that he himself was injured, that he was participating in competitions, but for some reason doubted her. The knight doesn't understand how this could have happened and asks her what she told Edward. The girl calmly says that she said something like, "We share physical contact," while Maction freezes at her words, wondering if she is saying this seriously now or not. Lewis continues by saying that she hoped the Archduke misunderstood the phrase, "I have a friend with whom I practice." The knight awkwardly finds himself nearby, wanting to explain the second meaning of his words to her. After the explanation, the girl bent down embarrassed, not understanding why she didn't think beforehand how ambiguous it could sound. She now realized that Edward had misinterpreted her words. Thinking that she was the mistress of one of the competition participants, she puts her hands to her head because such a misunderstanding is simply unacceptable. The girl decides that she definitely needs to apologize, but then freezes. It turns out that the main character still doesn't know about her participation in the contest, in which case it is better to keep everything secret until the end of the contest. That same evening, Edward watches Carlo walking with a girl through the city. The main character thinks that he left Miss Louise and went to meet another girl, the third one already tonight. Edward casts magic with a snap of his finger to summon water bubbles. Carlo freezes, and his gaze becomes blurry. He starts screaming in panic the name of a certain Robelia, stretching his hands in front of him in fear. The main character enjoys this with a smile. Because he had previously shown him the most terrible illusion, the man doesn't understand. If Carlo is so afraid of a girl named Robelia, then why is he cheating on her? The man on the side continues to watch the spectacle unfolding before him. After making sure Carlo is suffering, he leaves. They say he was lucky to keep his pretty face, only because he didn't want Miss Louise to get angry. The next day, Edward sees the news in the newspaper, where they write that Carlo has become a faithful man, looking only at one girl, and it's not Miss Louise. The main character, with a smile, thinks that Miss Louise will not have it easy at first, but she will definitely make a good decision. Maxion wonders why the Count is in such a good mood, and finds out that the Archduke simply likes the newspaper content. The knight remembers how Louis asked him to keep her participation in the contest a secret. However, the girl really asked for help to clarify the misunderstanding that had occurred earlier with Edward. Seeing this, Maxion realized that there was nothing to worry about, and that everything was already done by him. His Highness won the semifinals without problems, and the knight was glad that the misunderstanding between the Archduke and Louise would soon be resolved. As expected of Edward, who had returned to perils, he easily defeated his opponent even in the semifinals. And only Maxion realized that His Highness was using magic deceptively, because the bad condition of the enemy was the basis. However, this was admirable since not everyone can do this. It is necessary to control magic so that not even imperial mages can detect it. His Majesty awaits the final test, pitying Benny, confident that victory is in his pocket. The man asks the knight if there was a silver-haired girl among the participants. Maxion shakes his head, and the main character cannot believe that Lentia did not come for her sword. Edward looks to the future and decides that when he becomes emperor, he will immediately return the sword to where it was. The hero wants to find Alentia later, no matter where she is. Maxion wonders how His Highness will react when he finds out that he found his daughter instead of Alentia. Soon the day of the final arrives, and everyone anxiously waits to see who will win. The emperor shakes the man's hand, expressing his joy that he came, and asking if the temple is causing the high level of participation this year. His Majesty asks the hero to continue ensuring that God's protection reaches his empire. The emperor smiles slyly, clearly planning something. The finalists for Duke von Lindemann are announced over the loudspeaker, and suddenly a masked swordsman appeared, the rising star sword killer Benny. The crowd in the stands wonders why both heroes are not wearing armor, because the participants in the final are likely to be very tough. Edward notices familiar features and movements in Benny. When the swordsman looks directly at the Archduke, he recognizes Miss Louise under the mask. The loudspeaker asks them to greet each other, while Louise greets the man. The main character, as he had assumed earlier, recognized the girl by her voice. He now understands where Benny got such skills, but wonders how it happened, and why the girl participates in contests, to which he promises to explain everything later. The man apologizes for his previous behavior and says that the girl is free to choose her lover. Edward decides to test his conjectures by asking the main character if she participates in sword competitions to punish her dissolute lover, to which she receives a negative answer. Louis whispers that her only lover is not a slut, and this calms the man down. The crowd is discussing a new type of fight, as after bowing to each other as a greeting, the men remain standing without moving at all. The girl says she came for a prize, or rather Lentia's sword, the Dragon Slayer. Edward smiles and says he doesn't know the main character's circumstances, but that he will stick to her words, to which the girl feels, expecting a fair fight. The loudspeaker announces the start of the battle, and the heroes rush at each other. The Archduke blocks Louis's blow, gripping the seats tightly in his hands. He can barely withstand the girl's pressure and decides to defend himself. Maxion Tribune realizes that the protagonist is defending herself well from Louis. The Emperor, watching the fight, wonders who Benny is, and cannot believe that for the first time in a long time he has found such a person. The main character points out that the girl's balance is off, while Louis reminds him that Edward has defeated her before, although even the girl's victories against Maxim always ended in the man's defeat. And although the Archduke's victories were only an accident, according to Louis, luck is also a force. Enthusiastically, Edward attacks the girl and decides to act. Be that as it may, the prize is too good, especially when the last battle ends. The relationship between the heroes, as student and teacher, will also end. Since Miss Lewis realized that Layard has not changed, the meaningless relationship of the lovers will also be over. Therefore, the man simply hopes that their reunion lasts as long as possible. Unexpectedly, while the main character is drowning in his thoughts, Lewis changes her posture. The girl, with a light and sharp movement of her hand, pushes the main character's sword away. She holds the blade of the sword against Edward's throat as he recognizes her undeniable victory. He looks at Lewis and asks if she knows how he feels. To his question, the hero replies that he really missed the girl. The main character smiles and admits that she also missed the main character while they were arguing. The loudspeaker announces Benny as the winner and says the award ceremony will begin immediately. The Emperor asks Benny and Edward to come up to the podium, which surprises the Archduke because usually only the winner comes up. The main characters obey, while the man assumes they were summoned for a comparison. They walk while the crowd shouts at Benny to take off his mask and reveal his identity, but Lewis is not sure if she is ready to do it. The man understands that if Lewis's identity is revealed, it will be difficult for him in many ways. Besides the fact that she is a girl and also Layard's wife, who supports the Emperor, the main character does not want the girl to get involved in all this. The young people present themselves before the Emperor, who praises Benny for his victory and excellence. The man wants to see what the winner who displaced the heir to the throne looks like and wants to replace him. Meanwhile, Baltian steps onto the podium after suffering a slight defeat in the classification stage. After revealing Benny's skills, it became clear that the man did not lose because he was unskilled. The hero is depressed by the fact that his recognition has fallen below the pedestal, and if it is revealed now that Lewis is a girl, his reputation will never recover. The Emperor agrees with the crowd because he himself is curious to know what is hidden under the mask. He is interrupted by a shout about important information that Baltian wants to tell. The man introduces himself, running to the center of the arena, saying that he has always trained to protect the Empire. People wonder what the hero is going to do as he bows, asking permission to tell something about Benny. Edward turns bewildered towards Lewis, who also doesn't know what is happening. His Majesty is tense, but gives the hero permission to share whatever information he wants. His Majesty turns on the magic loudspeaker, expecting important information. The man says that even if it is difficult for His Majesty to confirm the identity of the participants in these competitions, he showed courtesy by allowing swordsmen whose identity cannot be established to participate in these competitions. The hero, bowing his head, asks not to reveal Benny's identity, because if this happens, many talented people will hide in the shadows. The Emperor is annoyed that the man is saying unnecessary information, wasting time. Meanwhile, Maction, to protect Lewis, starts shouting that Baltian is right. The Emperor understands that Baltian said absurd nonsense, but it would be good to use this for the image of a good emperor. He informs that he heard and saw the problem of revealing one's identity in public and will follow the man's will. But since it concerns the treasure of the imperial family, the man must know to whom he is giving it, and he asks Benny to come forward. Lewis is nervous and wonders if the Emperor will recognize her when she takes off her mask, something he has seen several times in the banquet hall. The girl wonders what will happen if she asks to keep her identity secret, or what she will answer if the Emperor asks about her fencing skills. Edward, seeing the girl's excitement, calms her down by telling her that nothing bad will happen. The man asks the girl to remember that her name is now Benny the Casser. He asks the girl to trust him, and the heroine agrees. The main character rises towards the Emperor when Edward snaps his fingers, and a slight glow appears near his hand. At the same time, Lewis introduces herself by the name Edward told her. When the Kaiser-Lindemann family asks her if she is a girl, she hesitantly answers affirmatively. Trusting Edward, the Emperor frowns and orders her to take off her mask, since Kaiser is the family that protects the former heir to the throne. Surprised that even such a talented person was his subordinate, the heroine obeys his order by removing her mask. She is ready to bow her head as an apology because, what's the point of just changing her name if he recognizes her by sight? However, the Emperor shrugs and says that Benny looks normal for the winner of the final. Usually those who hide their face behind a mask hide something impressive. His Majesty's mother smiles and praises Benny, pointing out that he looks like a kind person. While Lewis is surprised that he communicates so closely with members of the imperial family. The emperor hands Lensha's sword to her, and the girl thanks him. The main character carefully takes the sword in his hands and examines it. She remembers that this is the same sword her mother told her about. The girl is happy about this and approaches the Archduke, thanking him for his help. The man is happy for Louis. Although he couldn't keep his promise to Lensha, he isn't sad because he sees a happy girl. The main character asks how Edward managed to make the emperor not recognize her, to which the man replies that he simply asked a wizard what he knew. The girl wonders what kind of magic it is that makes her look like a completely different person when the emperor announces that he will soon give a speech. A huge hologram appears above the arena, asking for attention from the residents of Ceylon. The emperor announces that, with the active support of the public, the competition ends today. Edward tensely observes the huge hologram, amazed by the enormous magical power the emperor has mastered. The man is distracted when he notices Louis taking his hand, squeezing it tightly. She explains that the trembling hasn't passed yet, so it will be calmer for her being like this. Edward doesn't remove his hand, but notices that if they hold hands for so long, people will think they are homosexual, but the girl says everyone is still distracted looking at the emperor. Meanwhile, His Majesty notices the main characters holding hands. He cannot believe that his brother has such a relationship with his subordinate, and is surprised that the rumors of him being gay are true. He wondered why Benny wore such an ordinary-looking mask, but it turns out this was done to not reveal the weak side of the former heir to the throne. The man smiles sinisterly and decides to give a gift to the small couple, as it turns out that it will allow them to remain on good terms. At the same time, the hologram presents everyone with the long-awaited words of the temple oracle. A large package with strange luminous inscriptions appears in the air. People look at it tensely and start whispering about why the dragon is waking up. The crowd whispers, not understanding what feelings they have and whether it is good or bad that the dragon has awakened again. The priest enters the arena with a speech, saying that the oracle foresaw the dragon's resurrection. However, this does not mean that the nightmare of the past will come back to life, when 20 years ago they had to punish the dragon they faithfully served. This was because it suddenly became enraged and trampled on precious lives and property. But the people won the battle and restored peace through joint efforts. After the birth of the new emperor, His Majesty, Eligate von Velord, people dream of a new takeoff. So the temple interprets what the oracle said as follows. Upon waking from sleep, the dragon symbolizes the imperial family of the Ceylon Empire, and the darkness symbolizes the dark magic that partially remains throughout the empire. If the hidden meaning is revealed, His Majesty the new emperor will expel dark magic from the entire empire. Consequently, the temple will become His Majesty's sword. He will find the dark mages and punish them. Edward. He is not inspired by this speech because it is just a show for the emperor. And Louis wonders if the oracle really said that. The main character explains that they could not have invented this intentionally, but probably interpreted it arbitrarily in favor of the emperor. The girl looks at the weapon and thinks that if the dragon is truly reborn, there is some reason why her mother's sword passed to her. And finally, before the closing ceremony, His Majesty the Emperor will congratulate the winner. And the runner-up. The man says that thanks to people like the main characters, he feels calm and, in gratitude, he wants to entrust them with a great mission. Upon completing it, they will be able to protect the empire. The main character is cautious and does not understand what his brother is doing at this moment. While the emperor speaks about the strange phenomena that arose in the forest after the death of the black dragon, the hero orders the victorious Sir Benny and Sir Lindemann to go to perils and reveal these phenomena, in addition to discovering the reason for their appearance. Edward thinks this is a failure because Miss Louise also fell under the hot hand, even though he wanted to attract the winners to his side. The man bows to the emperor, saying that he submits to his will, but wants to declare that Benny will not go with him when the main character suddenly accepts the mission. The emperor says, with a smile, that he will leave for them in a month, while Edward remains in a stupor amidst loud applause. The main character apologizes to Louis, promising to think of something and assuring that even if she doesn't participate, the emperor can somehow be tricked. The girl asks the hero not to worry, telling him that she lived in perils for 20 years. Later, Maction and Louis explained everything to the man so as not to worry him further. Edward is surprised and still cannot believe that everything the heroes are telling is true. He did not expect the girl to turn out to be the daughter of Lensha, who had lived in perils for so long. The Archduke turns his attention to Maxon, surprised that he lived with Louis, and the knight, as an excuse, says that it was in the deepest childhood. The man regrets hearing such news about Lensha. He talks about how she was his teacher, even if only for a short time. Edward asks if the Count knows Louis's past, to which he receives a negative answer, but she explains that her husband only knows her maiden name, and no one knows who the girl's mother is. The protagonist realizes that she hides many things from her husband, and decides to ask him how he can tell her that she must go to perils. The man immediately becomes sad and says he does not want the girl to go on a mission, and that he will try to find a replacement for her, since her appearance can be changed with magic. The girl wonders why the main character so insistently wants to leave her in the city, to which he immediately replies that the man does not want to endanger Louis. The main character looks at the hero reproachfully, because that is what he says who lost the fight with her. The man explains that this is not the only reason, since all knights who go on an expedition are men, and during an overnight stay, two people must sleep in the same tent, so he cannot allow Louis to go with him. The girl says that in that case, she can sleep with Maxim. At such a suggestion, both men jump up, interrupting her and forbidding her from sleeping with someone in the same tent. The protagonist does not understand what the problem is, because she has lived with the knight for a long time. She even remembers that Maxon saw her bathing, and that the man makes excuses to Edward. They say this happened in a distant childhood. The girl promises not to bother her friend as before, but he still refuses. Louise, angry, says that it was she who received the order from the emperor, and that it is impossible to send someone else in her place, especially since the girl has already decided to leave, in order to sleep outside alone. Edward gives up, no longer trying to dissuade her, and offers to prepare another tent that only she can use, and guarantee the girl's safety from start to finish. The protagonist, having achieved her goal, joyfully thanks the Archduke. Louis remembers that there is another problem, and says that it would be good to divorce Layard before leaving. The men are shocked by her decision, and ask if everything will be all right. The girl laughs, and explains that it would be strange to report that she suddenly went on a trip with her lover, and even more so after a while, she accepted the fact that this marriage makes no sense. Later that night, Maxon serves drinks to His Majesty, and, in an attempt to support him, he says that he understands the hero's feelings, as he also wanted to attract Louis, but he feels uneasy that everything turned out this way. Edward quickly drinks a glass, and realizes that the girl promised she would participate in the expedition, and did not say she would participate in the betrayal. If she is involved with men now, she will also become a cheater and suffer severe damage in a bad situation. The main character understands that since everything turned out this way, they must look for another path. Although they embark on an expedition now, the heroes will be able to change direction in the middle of it. He offers to find a suitable place for Miss Louise, where she will teach fencing in a remote area, and far from the capital. The next day, in the morning, Edward writes a letter while sitting at the table. Since the Count clearly has his own goal, he will not let Miss Louise go so easily. There is very little left to do for Miss Louise to get a divorce. He definitely sends a pigeon with a letter standing by the window. Meanwhile, Layar enters the Emperor's office greeting him. The man tells the hero to sit down because they have a reason to celebrate. An official letter from Fendel has arrived. It reports that the princess will come to visit them. To Layar's surprised gaze, the Emperor explains that it took quite some time, but he still got her visit. Since the current Emperor's inauguration, King Fendel has never sent a member of the royal family to the Empire after a legate von Velord, who is the Emperor's illegitimate son, took the crown. He was angry. He thought they were ignoring him because of his origin, but Fendel was the second largest state on the continent after Ceylon, and they had good relations with the neighboring country, so they could not be hostile to each other. Layard understands that this is simply a great opportunity for him. The heroes flatter the Emperor and say that they must have finally realized that they have no choice but to accept the current government. He says he respects what the Emperor thinks of his inhabitants, and it was a right decision, and worthy of His Majesty. The Duke thinks to himself that it was a very careless decision, but in front of the Emperor, he only shows his best side. I congratulate him. His Majesty takes a glass, and asks this time for a man to try to seduce the Fendel princess. Seeing the hero's surprised look, He explains that the Archduke's first love was a princess from the kingdom of Fendel. She probably knows the Duke's background and weaknesses well. The official dinner will take place very soon, so the man simply cannot give up. Layard lowers his gaze hesitantly. They say he is not that skilled in seduction, and if the princess is beautiful, she will probably not care about her like he does. The emperor reports that besides coming to Kalon, there are rumors that she decided to honor them with her visit to find a man who can bring to her harem. But she doesn't seem satisfied with guys from her country. The hero refuses, reminding him that he is already married and that it will be difficult to do, because even homosexuals do not date married men. The emperor frowns and suggests that he simply get divorced. The man immediately has an image of Louis in his head and does not want to get divorced at all. His Majesty remembers that the hero would never give his heart to a modest woman. The emperor is right, because the reasons for Layard's marriage to Louis are obvious. No matter what conditions he presents to the girl, she will turn a blind eye to everything. Especially since having lost her husband, she will not have enough strength to be independent. She cannot stop him from plotting, and his lovers have good excuses to easily abandon her. She has always been the one he used for his own purposes. The emperor pulls him out of his thoughts by asking if he is tired of acting like a gigolo. The hero offers to take this opportunity to at least establish himself in the princess's harem, because it is a good opportunity to achieve success at this level. The man promises that when the Archduke dies, he will share part of his property with Layard. The hero admits that it is undoubtedly a good opportunity, but for some reason, he cannot stop thinking about Louis. However, he quickly agrees to fulfill His Majesty's order and promises not to disappoint him. Meanwhile, Louis selects medicines on the shelves of the shops. She chooses a bottle that suits her and buys it, talking to the merchant about the wonderful properties of the potion. The girl cannot believe that there is a drug that makes roses bloom without insects. I wonder who invented it. Having bought everything she needed, she immediately leaves the shop hearing loud shouts. A passerby fights with the girl, wondering where it was seen that the girl flirts just because of her appearance, while the heroine screams that if the man had money, she would straighten his face. Louis observes all this from the side, assuming that the girl is a person from Fendel. The main character examines the girl's bright red hair, while she complains that it is possible to be old, ugly, and even have a terrible character. The redhead's knight quickly takes care of the situation while she stands aside. Dissatisfied with what is happening, suddenly she notices Louis, and her eyes begin to shine. She quickly runs up to the girl, takes her hand and smiles radiantly at her. The main character awkwardly asks to be let go and makes a mistake, while the lady says that, when she sees handsome people, she seems to disconnect. The girl asks if Louis knows where Archduke Edward Lindemann's residence is. Edward greets Princess Diana and tells her that she is quite impatient when the girl enters the room. Diana asks if the letter sent is not an official document, saying that her schedule has been adjusted so she can arrive before the delegation. Is the man interested in what happened, or did something happen to the heroine? Because he thought the girl would contact him in writing as usual. The heroine shares that she simply received information via a letter about an unexpected gift from Edward, for which it was worth being patient. She asks what kind of gift it is, and they say it is too much because they are friends. When the man corrects her by reminding her that this is not friendship, but unilateral exploitation. Diana, who came to study in the Cylon Empire as a child, received help from Edward due to her high status. While studying, Diana created a fake identity and opened a business with the money she earned. She sent a man and had fun, until one unfortunate day, the heroine revealed her fake identity. After that, as payment for keeping the secret, she took money from the princess and both benefited. The princess wonders if it was because of Miss Clote that Edward called her. The girl remembers that Louis is beautiful, while Edward wonders how she knows. Diana says she met her accidentally on a shopping street and was happy because she had often seen her portraits in the newspapers before. In response to the main character's request not to touch Louis, the girl nods and says that she knows he wants her to be with him. Before, Edward also lived with beautiful people, but they were men, so Diana assumed he had special preferences. However, judging by the current situation, it seems she was wrong. But after smiling slyly, she bows and asks Edward if he likes men and women at the same time, to which the hero frowns, ignoring the question. Diana asks if Louis is against his plan, when the man says the girl knows nothing. The heroine asks surprised if it is possible to arrange a divorce without the consent of the other party, and, in any case, thank you for taking a handsome man with her. Edward says that Louis herself wants a divorce, but doubts that the Count will voluntarily seal it. In the process of overthrowing the Emperor, there will be no choice but to buy the Count. This could be a big shock for Louis, so Diana needs to take her with her. The girl says that even if he does this for Louis's sake in secret, later this situation can lead to misunderstandings. The situation raises a delicate question that is not at all easy to talk about. Diana says that she is only worried about the main character and gets up and tells him that he should go see how his beauties are doing. The man makes a hand gesture and tells her that he has prepared a document in which the current situation is analyzed, and upon leaving the butler will hand it to Diana. At the end of the expedition, the hero plans to return to the capital and start an uprising. And to protect the girl, he decided that Louis did not belong there. The protagonist, meanwhile, observes the caterpillars she previously pulled off the flowers. She notices a kind of glow on the flowers and decides to touch them, not understanding where the flower was hidden in such a place. However, the girl gets a scratch because she carelessly tries to take the flower. The main character sighs, looking at the cut, understanding that she is too curious, and remembers the problems she needs to solve properly. The expedition will take place in 3 weeks. It is not easy for her to start a conversation with Layard, believing it will be unexpected news for him. The girl wants to separate from him on good terms, but she doesn't know how or what to tell the man. Suddenly, Layard approaches her from behind, greeting her under her surprised gaze. The man offers her his hand to take, telling her that he has wanted to go for a walk with her for a long time. While she rejects his hand, answering that she is hurt, the main character looks at him sideways with disgust. After all, the hero didn't even ask if everything was all right and how she got hurt. A long time had passed since their last conversation, but everything was still the same. Layard shared another uninteresting story. He looked handsome as always, and his smile, like a painting, remained the same. Louis simply listened to him, because she felt that his elegant smile no longer radiated warmth towards her. The protagonist directly indicated that it seemed to her that the man was postponing talking about an important topic, as if it were difficult for him to talk about it. Layard confirmed it, and the girl realized that what they had lived through for several days made no sense. After all, the hero quite decisively suggested that she divorce him. The man immediately started making excuses, saying he wasn't doing this because he had stopped loving the heroine. But he still couldn't tell the real reason. The hero assumed that 6 months would be enough to get rid of the prince on the expedition, and if he died, he wouldn't have to become the princess's hostage. He still offered to divorce with a smile for only 6 months, suggesting they consider it a vacation. When unexpectedly for the man, Louis accepted. She looked at him coldly and now offered to divorce herself. Layard hesitated, and even the smile disappeared from his face as he looked at the girl in surprise. The hero thought she would be worried, or that there would be at least some kind of reaction. But this was a surprise to him. He immediately started wondering what happened, but quickly dismissed these thoughts, citing the fact that the girl simply wants to protect some of her pride. And this is a common reaction. According to Layard, in just a few months, all the annoying things hindering their relationship will disappear because the hero plays the emperor's puppet. He cannot meet another woman. The man watches the departing heroine and hopes she waits a little and doesn't do anything stupid, because the man was going to let her be his real wife. Meanwhile, Louis leaves the estate clutching the hem of her dress, the words about a reunion in 6 months. It makes her furious. She is angry and feels like a fool after endless worries, and attempts to create jealousy, because he talks about divorce so easily. And the reunion. The main character starts crying, wondering what else she expected from him, and thinking that she is simply shedding tears because she was hurt. However, now she can breathe deeply because all her regrets have disappeared. The girl wipes away her tears, looks up and realizes that she has come very far, and she has found herself in a new market. The heroine hears the loud chirping of a bird. She turns towards the sound and sees 2 men holding the bird and bringing scissors closer to it. She looked closer and saw that the men were holding the bird by the wings and taking it out of the cage. The protagonist ran towards them and asked if they were going to cut the wing tendons of the canaries, to which she received an affirmative answer. The man says that someone raised the male without even cutting his tendons, but the female was captured in the wild and trained. The hero suggested that the girl give him the birds and agreed not to cut their tendons if she took them. Lewis agrees and searches for money to pay 1 gold coin for 2 birds, but she panics realizing she didn't bring anything. The girl really wants to save the birds and asks the merchant to wait a little while. He looks at the heroine in disbelief. Suddenly, someone offers a loving bird bath. Edward stands next to Lewis under her surprised gaze and asks her how she ended up here. The man smiles and replies that he simply got lost in the new market. The hero asks to sell the birds along with the cage, to which the merchant happily agrees. Praising the cage, the heroes leave with the purchase, and Lewis promises to return the money as soon as she receives the prize. Edward calms the girl down by telling her she doesn't need to return anything because it's his gift, to which she refuses because she is going to set the birds free and won't be able to do that if it's his gift. The hero assures her that the girl can use the gift as she wishes, and she accepts. Lewis thanks him while the hero notices marks near her eyes and asks if she was crying. The girl awkwardly rubs her eyes and asks how much it shows, while the hero is surprised at how scared she was. The protagonist explains that she was crying not because of lack of money, but because of her husband, who decided to divorce. She says that Layer was the first to talk about divorce, and although she still thought about breaking up, the girl was suffering. Lewis says that not everything turned out as expected. The time she spent with her husband was in vain, and she was disappointed in herself. Edward looks at her with regret and, in an attempt to cheer her up, says that the girl did nothing wrong. The girl begins to say that she has a secret indeed. She has never been a naive and simple village girl. Although the protagonist did not know the world well in the past, she began to understand something. The moment the girl signed the marriage contract, she was a complete fool. Lewis understood everything at that moment, but signed anyway. The cells surrounding her protected her and deprived her of oxygen. The girl needed light, energy, home, and family, and Layard's offer seemed tempting to her. The heroine sighed, realizing that the man was using her, but she was also using him in return. Of course, there was some love. Otherwise, the girl would not have felt so hurt by their separation. She had been ready to break up with Layard even earlier, but she didn't want him to end up driving the girl away. The main character looks at the man and asks if he will help her carry out her plan. Layard approaches the stairs, meets Lewis there, and asks if she slept well. He notices a suitcase in her hand and is surprised that the girl has already packed everything. The man tells Lewis that he has prepared a residence for her where she can live and wait for 6 months. Lewis interrupts him, saying this is not necessary. Layard looks inquisitively at the main character when the butler reports that a guest has arrived for the count, and the girl asks him to let him in. Edward appears in the doorway, greets Lewis, and tells her that he has come to pick her up. The count looks bewildered at the Archduke, who approaches the girl and greets the man. Layard watches as Edward has a pleasant conversation with Lewis, taking the heavy suitcase from her while she explains that there isn't much in it. He tries to stop her eagerness to talk when the main character reports that he left the divorce document on the table and asks her to sign it and send it off. The girl puts an end to it by saying that everything is over. Layard grabs the heroine's hand, yells at her that she shouldn't give in to emotions, and asks her to wait another 6 months. He shouts that he loves the girl while Edward tenses up and asks the count to let go of Lewis's hand. The main character interrupts them, looking down and asking if the man really loved her. He asks not to ask the obvious, because he married her precisely because he loved her. The girl is surprised by this fact and admits that she loved him too. The count replies that he knows, and that is why he wants Lewis to wait 6 months. When the main character took the sword, she realized that this was a person whom she shouldn't even point a sword at. Lewis says with an indifferent face that she has decided to stop loving Layard, thinking to herself why she made such a simple decision now. This person was someone who was not worthy of even lifting a sword. Layard approaches, still holding the main character's hand, trusting that she won't let him go so easily. The girl replies that it was not easy for her at all. Every word he told her, and every sound of his breath was not easy for the heroine for a moment. The man's hand trembles, and he asks her to wait another 6 months, promising to give her whatever she wants. Lewis withdraws her hand and lets him go. She turns around, leaves, and says goodbye, that it is already too late, and bids farewell. The hero is left alone, bewildered and angry for being abandoned in this way. Meanwhile, Lewis apologizes to Edward because he had to participate in all this. But the man asks her not to apologize asking how the girl's wrist is because the Count grabbed her tightly. The main character notices a wound on her finger and wonders where the cut came from. The girl explains that she cut herself on a rose in the garden, and the man offers to treat the wound at the mansion. She smiles and agrees to have the wound treated, while Edward asks her with interest if she freed the birds. The girl nods, suggesting that they are flying freely in the sky now. The main character was glad to have let them go before it was too late. At that moment, Layard, furious, climbs to the second floor, perplexed how it is possible that his fiancée also abandoned him. Louis, he expected that this sudden proposal would have confused her, and that in 6 months her anger would subside and change her mind. The man repeats her words, every word. It was not easy for the girl to put on a painful expression. The hero furiously repeats in his head the words that everything is over. Layard grabs the banister of the stairs, thinking that the deposed heir is to blame for everything because he stole his innocent wife. The Count shouts that it was the Archduke who spoiled his wife and took advantage of her. He thinks that the girl will simply wander around for a while and will not be able to change. Layard opens the room and freezes, looking at everything with a surprised gaze. The room where Louis lived for 2 years was completely empty, and there was nothing to indicate the girl's presence. The man does not understand how the room can be so cold and sees an open window as he approaches it. He looks closer and sees a canary, remembering that yesterday the servant said that Louis had brought birds. It seemed like it was the same couple, but only one bird remained in the cage. The hero abruptly closes the cage, scaring the bird. He wishes Louis hadn't gone so far and regretted it later. Layard trusts that she will return to him in any case. A little later, the Count sits alone at the table having lunch. He sighs deeply, spins the glass in his hands, and doesn't understand why he is acting so strangely. His thoughts are interrupted by a servant who informs him that a letter from the imperial family has arrived for the Count. The man opens the letter, running his gaze over it and becoming even gloomier. He throws the letter onto the table with rage. Layard, irritated, promises himself that this time will be the last. The next day, he greets the princess by bowing his head to her. The man introduces himself with a sweet smile and explains that he will give her a tour of the castle. Diana immediately asks if he is the married man famous for his unsurpassed beauty in the empire, thinking to herself that it has been a long time since they last saw each other, but he still has the same excellent appearance. The Count does not deny it, and the girl directly asks him if he is trying to seduce her. The heroine stares at him and says she is not interested in men who have been used and discarded. Layard explains that there was a misunderstanding, and it was his initiative to divorce so that he could serve the princess. Diana replies that there are different rumors, while the Count excuses himself, saying that the rumors about him are always half misleading. The man leans towards the girl with a smile and asks if she is interested in knowing the truth about him. Diana smiles and asks if he can prove that everything is as he says. She explains that she cannot stand contradictory thoughts and that, as he says, the couple separated. So in this case, the girl wants to verify everything personally and asks if the hero can do as she says. Louis sits down at the table with Edward. Amazed, even though a week has already passed, new rumors appear every day. The main character advises her to refrain from walking for her own mental health. The girl says that she needs to prepare for the trip by training in the training ground, and she is also thinking of looking for a new home with the money earned in the swordsman competition. The main character invites Louis to look for a house after returning from a walk, since if she buys it now, the girl will simply leave it empty. The girl agrees that it is a good idea and decides to remain indebted to Edward a little longer. They are interrupted by a servant who enters the room and hands the letter to the man, while he assumes it is an invitation to a banquet in honor of the princess. He opens the letter and finds an invitation for Louis there too, after handing it to the surprised main character. The girl wonders if not only members of the imperial family are invited to the imperial banquet, and aristocrats, and whether she is no longer an aristocrat. Edward says this rarely happens, but this time an exception was made, and the heroine was invited as the man's companion. Apparently the princess's influence came into play, which the Archduke does not like. He asks if the girl would mind going, even if the princess and the heroine of the occasion. Louise becomes the subject of gossip, and a lot of attention will also be paid to her. And most importantly, she will have to meet Layard again after the divorce. The main character looks at the man, thinking that there is no longer any need to give the Count so much importance. In any case, her companion is now Edward. Louise is interested in how the man feels, since Princess Feindella will be at the banquet, to which she only receives an inquisitive look. She explains that her first love is Princess Diana, while the man freezes in shock and asks where the girl got this information from. The protagonist says that her mother used to talk about this. The woman often read the newspapers and believed that the characters got along well. Edward resolutely denies everything, assuring that all this is fiction and a provocation. Because newspapers usually publish such nonsense, Edward and Diana are the same age, and in childhood the relationship between the crown prince and the princess of a neighboring country became the basis for rumors. Another reason for gossip is the frequent time they spend together. Even then, Edward complained that they were always misunderstood when he and the girl discussed confidential matters. As children, they secretly ran a business and planned to monopolize the supply of medicine to merchants. To think that these rumors and misunderstandings would end up in the newspapers, Edward explains that he and the princess simply know each other since childhood. Louis nods and realizes that she might have been mistaken, while the man wonders what else was in the rumors besides his romance with the princess. The protagonist tells how her mother used to say that the Archduke was very ugly in person and felt sorry for the princess. The girl also says that, according to rumors, the man did not have the best character, so she was advised not to get involved with the imperial family in the future. And Edward understands that Lentia did everything possible so that her daughter would never get involved with him in the future. The main character thinks and remembers the princess thinking about how she immediately realized that something was wrong. The girl smiles, immersed in her reasoning and touched because the Archduke, like her, has a childhood friend. At the same time, Edward silently apologizes to Lentia because despite all his efforts, his daughter turned out to be very closely related to him. The man asks the heroine if it is true that her maiden name is Servinia. She nods and replies that she heard that this surname comes from a line of healers in the imperial family, and that her father also worked in the imperial family. The girl suggests that maybe Edward heard the name Elian of Servinia, but immediately smiles and says that it is a common name and the man probably doesn't know it. The Archduke, surprised, says that of course he knows that name because his father was the best of the imperial family's healers. Louis asks again, surprised, remembering that he never said he was an aristocrat. If you think about it, the girl's father said that if something happens, she needs to take the brooch and go to the largest hospital in the region. Edward explains that all this is because most of the empire's healers studied at the academy, run by the Serbia family. He believed that the man died while killing the dragon, but apparently this report was deliberately false. And that's why the hero is very surprised now. The main character asks him if he knows what happened after that, because now she became interested in her family's situation. The men reply that after Louis's father left, his younger brother became the head of the country, and his son assumed the status. The heroine asks him if he is working now, to which she receives a negative answer. The Serbinia family no longer works as healers for the imperial family, and she has completely stopped appearing in secular society. The main character talks about the execution of aristocrats on the day of the former emperor's death, where the head of Serbia was. Louis asks, surprised, if her family supported the uprising since they were executed. In response, Edward trembles, explaining that people say it was an accident that this tragedy happened to them because they fell into the hands of traitors. The man says that now, after the change of power, they completely stopped going out. They left the capital and visited their possessions. Serbia's possessions are located at a fork in the road, instead of the hero's expedition. So the Archduke offers to look there on the way. The girl agrees because she never really thought about her origin, but now there is a reason. Servinia, a relatively common surname, and since she grew up in the Perils Forest, the girl naturally believed she was a commoner. The heroine's family name that her ex-husband considered too insignificant, and her father was the head. The girl resolutely says that she is waiting for the imperial family's banquet. There is no one else whose opinion is hers. Later, Filio complains because he cannot believe that Edward asked him to sew her a new dress in just 2 days. The main character praises him while the man rubs his mustache, a little embarrassed. Louis comes out of the fitting room praising the dress and twirling around in it, asking the men's opinion. Filio runs up to the girl, tells her the dress looks great on her, and praises his own work. Edward freezes in admiration looking at the girl and is speechless. The main character asks again if she likes the dress when she realizes she needs to answer. The man stands up, approaches the girl and takes her hand, telling her she looks great. And the protagonist smiles, answering that she didn't even think she would wear a new dress. Edward explains that this is an imperial banquet that she will attend as his companion. Obviously, he must do this for her. The main character asks Filio to bring her suitable jewelry and shoes, while the man is glad to have seen such emotions on His Highness's face. The princess's welcome banquet arrived, and the main characters exited the carriage in luxurious outfits, arm in arm. As soon as they appear, people immediately start whispering that this is the first time the girl has gone out into the world after a divorce. People whisper about Liar and Louis as the heroes simply proceed to the banquet. The protagonist exhales and tells her interlocutor that she seems to have gotten used to being a clown. Louis jokes, saying she wonders what a celebrity's life is like, while Edward laughs about it. The girl overhears the girls talking nearby and recalls her surname. The Servinia family hasn't appeared in secular society for a long time. People kept whispering, while Louis was surprised that they knew more about her family than the main character herself. The girl remembers something important and decides to tell Edward, telling him she already met the princess. She says she accidentally ran into Diana on the way when the girl was looking for where Edward's residence was. The main character expresses the desire to share a conversation with the girl, because last time she wasn't very friendly. Louis says she is also interested in knowing what Edward was like in his youth, while he frowns. Finally, Princess Diana Rodziferdel steps out from someone's arm. Louis looks closely and sees Layard. She immediately changes her face from irritation upon looking at this picture. People immediately made a fuss, thinking now that it was because of the princess that Layard divorced, and not because Louis left with his lover. There were rumors that the princess didn't touch married men, and therefore, it wasn't the Archduke who pushed the Count aside, but rather Louise was simply abandoned. The girl retracted her words about being used to being a clown since the banquet started 30 minutes ago, and people are already talking a lot. Edward sees the main character's irritation and offers to go out to the terrace, so as not to listen to gossip. A little earlier, the princess and Layard approached them, greeted Edward and thanked Miss Louise for the last time. The protagonist did not expect to see her ex-husband with the princess, although this was not that surprising. The girl, lowering her gaze, shared with the Archduke that for her, the ball had always been an uncomfortable event, but she hoped that at least today would be a little different. Louise was walking away with Edward when she suddenly felt someone's hand on her shoulder. She turned around startled, but then saw Layard. The man persistently asked the girl to talk to him. The main character blocked the main character, asking what Layard was going to do. When the man briefly replied that he needed to talk to his ex-wife and asked His Highness to step away, Edward stepped aside and asked Louis to decide whether to go with Layard or not. The girl, seeing all this, sighed and agreed there to meet the hero and talk. They go out onto the balcony staying alone, while Louis asks to start immediately with the point so as not to waste time. Layard realizes that he gets along well with the Archduke, and the girl sharply replies that this is exactly the case, and that everything is much better now than before with Layard. The man says nothing, looks at the mysterious black bracelet. A little earlier, Diana asked to prove that the hero had completely broken up with Louis, and gave him the bracelet, telling him to use it to listen to what the ex-spouses were talking about. The man starts the conversation by apologizing, to the protagonist's surprised gaze. Layard says he is apologizing because he never loved Louis for a moment. He realized this after meeting the princess and doesn't understand why he wandered around all this time. His heart was always turned towards Princess Sephardel. The man hints that he hasn't been able to forget her since the day he ran into Diana in the capital several years ago. The hero asks for forgiveness for proposing marriage, even though he didn't love Louis thanks to him because the girl divorced him. Thanks to this, he wants to start over with the princess, while Louis says she understood everything, and congratulates the man, asking if he said everything he wanted. The hero turns off the bracelet saying, there is still one thing left. Layard abruptly changes his face from calm to angry, convincing the girl that the Archduke is a dangerous man, and that she can separate from him as soon as possible. The main character exhales and notices that he doesn't seem to think about being polite until the end. However, this is good for her and brings her relief, because she no longer loves Layard. Louis turns away, eager to leave, saying she hopes Layard will be happy with the princess. The girl hurries away because Edward is waiting for her. At this moment, the main character is standing on the balcony, looking at the garden. She gets distracted when the princess enters and asks what happened. The girl replies that she came to confess. She thought that if she came herself, then the hero wouldn't get so angry, and the man directly asks if this appearance was Layard's doing. Diana nods and presses the same bracelet as Layard. The Count's voice is heard from the bracelet, and Edward asks the girl why she is eavesdropping on someone else's conversation. While Diana explains that she told Laird to test his intentions, Diana listens to the confusing words and frowns in surprise, looking at the bracelet. The main character, dissatisfied, says why Diana hurts Louis this way, and the girl excuses herself, saying she didn't ask Laird to say exactly this, but only wanted to make sure that the couple broke up. Edward asks not to touch the main character again, and Diana apologizes. She also didn't know that the Count would go this far, but she should have made sure that the couple's connection was severed. The heroine explains that she thought Layard had no feelings, but if he is not a fool, then his goal is obvious. The main character understands the girl's fears, but wonders why situations keep happening where only Louis gets hurt. The Count's voice is heard from the bracelet calling Diana, and she bids farewell to the Archduke, saying that the hero's gift has called her. Suddenly, the doors open, and Louis enters them asking what all this means. The princess and the Archduke are startled, looking at her in surprise. The main character frowns and asks why they are talking about her, and why they are eavesdropping on a conversation with her ex-husband. Diana awkwardly replies that apparently she won't be able to make excuses. The girl decides to explain that this was done to ensure there is nothing more between the ex-spouses. Diana asks for forgiveness, and Louisa feels, and says she does not regret her relationship with Layard. The main character wants to hear the rest of the story from Edward's mouth, so she asks Diana to leave her alone with the man. The heroine leaves and bids farewell to both Louis and the Archduke. Louis trembles with emotion and asks for the rest of the story and an explanation of what Layard's gift means. The heroine wonders why the princess said Layard was her gift. Edward sighs and admits that it is all his fault. He explains that he handed the Count over to the princess because he thought Louis's divorce from the Count would not happen. So he planned it. The man thought it would be good if the Count and the princess got together, so he brought Diana, whom he liked. The main character doesn't understand why the man planned everything. She already said that before the expedition, she would end her relationship with Layard. She asks him if he really thought that if the Count didn't let her go, she would just accept it. The girl, irritated, asks if she seems so foolish that she cannot even get a divorce on her own. The heroine emphasizes that even if this is her opinion of her, the divorce is solely her business. Louise was very confused because she did not expect to see such a side in a man. The girl says that she will go first, as she needs to sort out her thoughts after such news. Edward is left alone, sighing deeply. A few days later, Maction is sitting in front of a newspaper where strange news is still being published. Among everything, one thing catches his attention. He asks the Archduke what happened with Louis since she returned alone from the banquet, especially since the heroes have been eating separately for 3 days. Edward tells the knight everything, and Maction offers to tell the girl about the plan, because it is a very unpleasant situation for her. The hero explains that this is due to the war, and he must understand that the issue is her safety. Her divorce from the Count is necessary to separate them because of the bloody wind that will rise in the capital. Edward refuses because this is a matter of Louis's safety and believes this should not be done. The main character decides to simply explain the situation and apologize, but Maction doesn't understand how they will embark on the expedition. The Archduke informs that he is going to remove Louis from the expedition. He has been thinking about this issue for 3 days and considers it the right decision. For Louis's sake, the man decides to stay away from her. Meanwhile, the girl trains with dummies near the Archduke's estate. She is perplexed because for 3 days, Edward not only did not apologize, but also did not come. The heroine wonders if it is so difficult for a man to apologize. Louis assumes that the hero is deliberately avoiding her, and for the last few days has only been sitting in his office. The girl gets angry because he made a mistake and worries her by not getting a response from him. All sorts of thoughts come to her head. She wonders if the man thinks she is so untrustworthy that he needs to stay away from her. no matter how she thought Edward would respect her intentions. Suddenly, the main character approaches the girl and asks why she was training late at night. Louise sighs and says she cut all the training dummies because someone made her angry. She looks at the man reproachfully, tells him that lately he hasn't shown his nose, and asks him what led him to come so late. Edward admits that he was sorting out his thoughts this whole time and thinking about everything. The man says he acted arrogantly and should have discussed everything with the heroine first. However, the hero admits that it is true that he cannot trust the girl. The Archduke asks what would have happened if he hadn't helped the heroine, how long she would have lived like this. He believes he couldn't avoid interfering in a matter like her divorce. The man points out that thanks to what happened, he realized that Louis is exceptional, but the hero cannot trust her enough to confide in her. The girl gets angry and asks what about the expedition? How can he go on a deadly expedition with someone he cannot trust? The main character hints to the girl that this is why he initiated that conversation. Louis grabs her sword and replies that then it would be better if she were excluded from the expedition. She turns around and leaves, wanting to return safely with Edward. On the day of departure for the campaign, the knights check what is missing and report to the Archduke. One of the men hands Edward a list of things that need replacing. The knight notices changes in the main character's behavior and asks if there is a problem. Edward replies negatively and praises the hero, telling him to work as before. Maxon, seeing the main character's tension, asks him to try to relax, because he did exactly what he wanted. The Archduke sighs and replies that the knight knows how to press the patient. 3 days have passed since Louis left the main character. Now he needs to stop thinking about it and embark on an expedition. Edward entrusts the rest of the inspection to Maxon and decides to move on to other matters. He leaves the camp, wondering if the girl feels empty after leaving. He looks at the annex where Louis lived and remembers that just a few days ago she was so beautiful. Meanwhile, Louis is shopping in the market. The merchant asks the heroine if she is former Countess Cloth, as she greatly resembles the portraits of the girl in the newspapers. Louis nods and says she is now called Servinia. The woman apologizes, replying that she read about the surname in the newspaper, but forgot it. The merchant lowers her voice, asking if it is true that she had a fight with His Highness, and if she regrets leaving the Count. The woman assures the heroine that she doesn't need any man and asks her not to worry too much and simply enjoy her life. Louis feared being asked about the rumors, so she put on a visor hat, but it turned out to be useless. The merchant apologizes for her lack of tact and offers the heroine to buy Benny's mask, since the swordsman competition ended a long time ago, which is why things related to this event are selling poorly. The girl agrees to buy a mask as a souvenir, because very soon she will return to her homeland. The next day, the knights embarked on a horseback expedition through the main square. People start gossiping, looking at the Archduke over the former Countess. The girls comment that Louis just separated from her fickle husband and that her next lover is going on an expedition. They consider it a very unfortunate fate. People also notice the fake Benny and admire him. They enthusiastically shout his name while bidding him farewell on a ride. The knights with carts leave the city and enter the forest. The knight takes Benny's mask off, surprised how popular the character is, but he notices that the mask is uncomfortable. The man asks the Archduke a question, asking why Benny couldn't go. Everyone was really waiting for him and thought he would be a good assistant. The knight admires Benny's skills and prowess. Edward does not answer questions, turns around and continues driving. Another man remembers that this decision was initially the Emperor's whim, and even for themselves, getting involved in this matter is dangerous. And the young man has nothing to do with this. Maxon asks to remain silent because the people behind the walls are still watching them. One of the knights notices that His Highness was incredibly quiet today, just like yesterday. The boy wonders what is bothering the man. Maxon approaches the main character on horseback and asks if everything is all right, to which Edward wonders if he is behaving so strangely that even the knight was worried about him. The main character replies that sometimes Maxon reacts as if he were a crystal Archduke. Edward decides that it is impossible to constantly think about the departure of one person. Louis is too strong for his words to hurt the girl. A man decides to concentrate on his work when he suddenly notices something. He stops his horse and asks Maxon to come and hit him. The man refuses, says he values his life, and asks what happened. The heroes look down from the cliff and notice that there is a man below. They are surprised to recognize Miss Louis standing below. The girl is standing with a mask she bought from a merchant looking at Edward. Maxon wonders what the girl is doing here. Edward tells the knight to stay near the group while he goes to talk to the heroine. The Archduke dismounts next to the girl, greeting her. Louis greets him in return by taking off the mask. She admits that no matter how much she thought about his fight, she couldn't understand it. The main character really thought a lot about the man's words and actions towards her. If she was a person who was not so trustworthy, so much so that Edward said such hurtful things to her. But after that, the girl remembered how the hero patiently waited until she herself understood everything. He didn't give her any advice and didn't interfere. The Archduke, after their joint training, treated Louis like a teacher and respected the girl the whole time. Edward replies that he simply is not the type of person who only has good things about him. The protagonist explains that in the capital, she lived like a flower in a greenhouse, and asks if the man really believes she knows nothing. Her ex-husband ran to the emperor anytime, whenever he called him, and Louis is aware that Edward is the heir who was exiled by the emperor to a deadly place. The girl believes that Edward opposed her participation in the expedition and diligently tried to divorce the heroine because he feared for her safety. The heroine thinks that the man deliberately pushed her away because of his anxiety. The main character asks if everything he said is true, and then why he came here because he could be in danger. Louis says she wants to be close to Edward. Raising her sword, the girl realized that she still wanted to protect the hero. She asks if Edward can trust her, because she will offer all her strength to protect the man. The Archduke hugs her feeling. The hero asks why the girl risks staying by his side, and admits that he is happy, guilty, and grateful at the same time. The man asks for forgiveness from the girl again, while she replies that nothing can be done. The main character asks to be allowed to participate in the expedition and to wear Benny's mask again. Edward agrees thanks to the girl. He admits that he made a mistake when he hurt Louis. The girl promises to forgive the man this time, but points out that she will not give him that chance again. The heroine asks him not to push her away anymore by causing her pain. Now Edward is thinking about how to explain to Louis to the squadron members. And the girl has an idea. Maxon and the other knights look ahead in surprise, not believing what they see. In front of them, the boy introduces himself as Benny and says that he will also participate in the expedition. Maxon remains in shock while all the other knights bother Benny with questions. He looks at Edward bewildered, while the man explains that this is all Miss Louise's idea. The main character casts the same spell as on the pipe, and for a while she will look like an ordinary man. And ordinary, the man offers to greet when the squad reaches the nearest town. But for now, since there aren't enough horses for Benny, he will travel in a cart. The main character asks Maxon to load Benny's things into the cart, and tells him that they will buy the boy a horse in the town along the way. The heroes talk in whispers, and Louis explains that for now she will travel in this form, because everyone knows her only as Edward's mistress. The knights might think that just a couple in love burst into a sacred expedition, and they will lose all their trust. Maxon points out that it is strange to see a man's face, a man's body, and a man's voice in a friend. Louis gets into the carriage, and Edward asks for forgiveness for not putting her on the same horse as him. Because for others the girl looks like a man, so it would be strange. The main character assures that everything is fine and wonders if the Archduke is spending too much magic on her. When the man replies that no, and that it was a necessary procedure anyway, Maxon interrupts their conversation by asking how long Louis will remain in this form. The main character replies that she will hide until she fully proves her skills. Edward mounts his horse again and announces the departure of the detachment.
So,